Chapter 242 The Marshall Meeting Begins. Chapter 242 The Marshall Meeting Begins. Chapter 242 The Marshall Meeting Begins. As Lin Ming stepped through the gate into the profound sky mountains, he immediately felt that the heaven and earth origin energy was much thicker here, by around 60 to 70%. If one were to cultivate here, they would have twice the result with half the effort. As he turned around to look back at the gate, he was surprised to see faintly shining charms and runes inscribed onto it. Apparently, there was also an array formation placed on the mountain gate. I see, so the profound sky mountains were formed over the center of a dragon pulse, but there was also an array formation barrier that gathered the heaven and earth origin energy. Not even considering the highest peak of the profound sky mountains, but even the heaven and earth origin energy of profound sky city was much more vibrant than sky fortune kingdoms by far, not to mention all the other resources that were available to the 7 profound valleys. No wonder this caused so many martial artists to be jealous, and why even peak bone forging martial artists would rather stay and defend profound sky city as gate guards than go to a smaller country and work as commanders. It wasn't only Lin Ming who discovered the extremely rich heaven and earth origin energy of the profound sky mountains. Many of the young talented heroes that came for the first time were amazed, vividly speaking about this astonishing phenomenon. They also began to envy the resources that were available to the disciples of the total faction. Not too far away from the main road on a cliff, there were several 7 profound valleys disciples that were looking down on the dense stream of people. Their expressions seemed as if they were accustomed to seeing this small fry country bumpkin martial artist entering their city. "Is that him?" A white-clothed man standing in front of the group asked a nearby disciple with true essence sound transmission as he tapped his fingers. "Yes, it's that guy. His name is Lin Ming. He was the one that injured Ouyang Ziyun. In the Mountain Gate trial, what number was he?" Although the ranking of the Mountain Gate trial didn't reveal one's true strength, it was usable as a reference point. "Around 80-something. I don't recall the exact number. A decent rank. With such a rank, there is no need to worry that he won't qualify later. It's better like this. I will make him rue the day he was born." The white-clothed man revealed a sinister smile as he said this. At this moment from in the crowd, Lin Ming suddenly turned his head to look at him. They faced each other, then Lin Ming smiled and turned back. The white-clothed man was surprised. He truly is worthy of being called a soul force genius. His perception is keen to the degree of startling me. He's even able to sense when people are observing him. Well, good, I'm becoming more and more interested in this fellow. 1 year ago, Lin Ming would never have dreamed that on his 16th birthday he would actually enter into the 7 profound valleys. At that time, the 7 profound valleys was simply a heaven-like existence that was too distant a goal. Not mentioning the 7 profound valleys, even Sky Fortune Kingdom's 7 profound martial house was beyond difficult for him to reach. Now, on the same day as Lin Ming's 16th birthday, the total faction martial meeting would officially begin. The martial field was located at the highest peak of the profound sky mountains, which was also where the 7 profound valleys total faction was located. The profound sky mountain's highest peak was 60,000 feet high. This mountain was simply incomparably massive and rocky. The mountain exuded an invisible pressure that would cause a weak martial artist to feel extremely suppressed, only able to display 50% of their strength. As the sun rose, there were already thousands of people gathered at the square in front of Great Hall. There were disciples of the 7 profound valleys, as well as high-ranking individuals of large families and guests of the 7 profound valleys. The 7 profound valleys had invited them here to watch the martial meeting, and also to show their own strength. The Great Hall's square was 10 miles wide, and flat and smooth as a whetstone. A martial arts master had cut down this section of the mountain and flattened it. At this time, the square was divided into 10 regions. Each region was separated by an array formation, and these array formations covered the entire area in order to isolate all true essence, so there wasn't any danger of being affected by the aftermath of fighting. There were 209 young talented heroes that had managed to pass through the mountain gate. These talents were divided into 10 groups, each group having 20 or 21 individuals. Out of these groups, 10 of them would eventually qualify for the next stage. Once all 10 groups were added together, there would be a total of 100 disciples. Those would be the first 100 rankings of the total faction martial meeting. If one could make it to the top 100, it was already a result to be proud of. As for those young outstanding talents, they also had an opportunity to continue. They were able to pass through a 10,000 killing array for a ranking. As long as they passed the Mountain Gate trial, they would be able to obtain an exact ranking. Lin Ming already knew which group he would be in, the 6th group. This grouping was not drawn from lots, but was decided by the 7 profound valleys. Sky Fortune Kingdom and Huoluo Nation were both in the same area. At every total faction martial meeting, they would be assigned to the same group. In addition, there were also 3 countries and martial cultivation families. Altogether, there were 5 second-grade influences on their side. During this martial meeting, these 5 influences had brought a total of 9 people that were able to pass the Mountain Gate trial. Sky Fortune Kingdom had 3, Huoluo Nation had 3, the 2 large martial families had 3, and the rest had none. The 6th group had 21 disciples altogether. Besides these 9 people, the other 12 were disciples of the 7 profound valleys total faction. The total faction assigned the groupings of their disciples based on the rank at which they passed the Mountain Gate. This was in order to ensure that every group had an average strength within. As Lin Ming began to size up his competition, he suddenly heard the cry of a bird coming from up above. He looked up and saw a massive heavenly winged eagle flapping its wings and circling around. This heavenly winged eagle had a commanding aura as it flew in the skies of the profound sky mountains, looking down at the world below with scorn. This heavenly wind eagle was several times larger than an ordinary heavenly wind eagle. Not only that, but its wings were a deep gold. This golden color made one think that this bird was actually a golden-winged rock, or maybe that this big eagle was from the lineage of a saint beast. It's people from Peacock Mountain. Humph, they are too arrogant. Not only are they not coming down to the entrance, but they are still hovering in the sky. There's nothing we can do about it. For the past 100 years, Peacock Mountain has been getting more and more fierce, and is beginning to pressure us. It's normal for them to act arrogantly. Lin Ming was standing beside the 7 profound valleys disciples of the 6th group as they spoke amongst each other in a low voice. Peacock Mountain? What sort of place is that? Lin Ming had never heard of this place before. Qin Zia said, Peacock Mountain is 800,000 miles away from the 7 profound valleys, and is also a 3rd-grade sect. Their strength is superior to the 7 profound valleys, especially in the last 100 years. There are several peerless talents that have emerged from Peacock Mountain, and they've already become one of the top grade 3 sects. During every total faction martial meeting, Peacock Mountain will always send some people to watch and understand the strength of the 7 profound valleys younger generation. Of course, our 7 profound valleys also sends people to attend the tournament that they hold. I see. How many grade 3 sects are there in the Sky Spill continent? What is the highest grade sect? Lin Ming couldn't help but ask this. As he came into contact more and more with the vast world, the increasing number of superpowers left him astonished. Qin Zia forced a smile and said, I'm not too sure. Our 7 profound valleys mostly only communicates with other 3rd-grade sects. As for those higher-grade sects, they are simply out of reach. Qin Zia's voice had just fallen, when a clarion cry resonated in the sky. This was even more high-pitched than the heavenly wind eagle, and was simply frightening. As the golden heavenly wind eagle in the air heard this cry, it suddenly became frightened. Its lofty and arrogant manner completely evaporated, and it soared down in panic. Thousands of eyes turned up to the horizon. At this time, everyone was looking completely dumbfounded. Vermilion bird. Heavens! A vermilion bird. Is it for real? That golden heavenly wind eagle from a moment ago only had the bloodline of a saint beast. But a vermilion bird was a true saint beast. Because there were no true phoenixes within the Sky Spill continent, the vermilion bird was considered the king of all bird. Once the golden heavenly wind eagle encountered the vermilion bird, it would inevitably feel a deep dread and dismay emerge from its bloodline, and could only flee in panic. How could it possibly dare to occupy the same skies as a vermilion bird? I've never seen a saint beast in my entire life. Even the sect elders might have never seen something like this. This is truly worthy of being the 7 Profound Valleys total faction. In my small land it would simply be impossible for me to ever see a saint beast. A disciple from the 16 martial families clenched his fists, his face ruddy with excitement. To see a legendary saint beast, he felt that he could say he lived his life without regret. Lin Ming noticed that the several total faction disciples near him were speaking as if they were at a loss on how to explain this. A 7 Profound Valleys disciple thought aloud, one of the factions actually has a vermilion bird. I've been here for over 20 years and I've never heard something like this. The vermilion bird flew to the top of the profound sky mountain's highest peak. Even the usually calm Qin Zia seemed to have lost all his composure. He said, They are probably people from Divine Phoenix Island. That is, a 4th grade sect. The various graded sects usually stayed in their own circles. A 4th grade sect wouldn't normally associate or speak with a 3rd grade sect. Qin Zia had said that the 7 Profound Valleys didn't keep in contact with a 4th grade sect, but in the next moment, a 4th grade sect had actually come. Listening to Qin Zia's words, Lin Ming gulped, his face revealing a strange color. Divine Phoenix Island? Qin Xingxuan echoed as she watched the vermilion bird flying in the sky. Qin Xingxuan's eyes filled with longing. How nice would it be if she could ever have her own vermilion bird? Qin Zia said, Divine Phoenix Island is among the top of all 4th grade sects. I never expected that they would come to the 7 Profound Valleys total faction martial meeting. This is probably the first time that this has happened in the last several hundred years. Qin Zia hadn't finished when the 7 Profound Valleys spirit boat flew up to welcome the guests. Lin Ming glanced upwards. The ones on the spirit boat were the 3 valley masters of the 7 Profound Valleys. In order to have such a welcoming party, it could only be for the absolute pinnacle existence. The guest is strong and the host is weak. Not only that, but we are lower by an entire grade. It's just the way it is, Qin Zia said as he shook his head. The difference in power between grades was enormous. For instance, Sky Fortune Kingdom was a 2nd grade power whilst the 7 Profound Valleys was a 3rd grade power. When someone came from the 7 Profound Valleys who wasn't even an elder, like Ouyang de Hua, the Emperor of Sky Fortune Kingdom had to come out and pay his respects, lest he provoke the other. With this, the difference between the two could be ascertained. The 7 Profound Valleys Valley Master Shi Zongtian had just gotten the message a few days ago that Divine Phoenix Island would be sending out someone to observe their total faction martial meeting. Shi Zongtian had been absolutely bewildered by this. He had no idea why a 4th grade sect would suddenly decide to take interest in the festivities. I am the 7 Profound Valleys Valley Master, Shi Zongtian. I cordially welcome the martial cultivators from Divine Phoenix Island to our land, Shi Zongtian said as he stood in front on the spirit boat, cupping his fists together in greetings. His welcome had embodied respect, while not showing too much humility. Valley Master Shi, well met. The one who spoke was a black-clothed woman wearing a mask. Her cultivation was at the extreme Xiantian realm. There were also 2 maids behind her clothed in purple, whose cultivations were at the peak Hutian realm. The Divine Phoenix Island took the phoenix as their representative saint beast. Their legacy cultivation methods also originated from meditating and comprehending the majesty of the phoenix. Because of this, their cultivation methods were more suitable for women, and in their sect, 90% of the disciples were women. Lin Ming saw the masked woman, and even though her appearance was covered, he was able to recognize that she wasn't Mu Qianyu. Chapter 243 Fairy Maiden Qing Hong. Chapter 243 Fairy Maiden Qing Hong. Chapter 243 Fairy Maiden Qing Hong. What was I thinking? How could she possibly? Lin Ming shook his head, laughing at his own thoughts. Mu Qianyu was the top-tier 4th grade sect Divine Phoenix Island's saintess among saints. In the future, she would become the sect master, a fairy maiden that came to Earth who would be respected and admired by countless people. As for him, who hadn't even truly broken through to the pulse condensation period, the difference between them was greater than the clouds and mud. Mu Qianyu would probably only think of him if she were bored in her spare time. How could she possibly come to the 7 Profound Valleys and watch such boring matches? In Lin Ming's opinion, a saintess was probably a figure that would become the successor to the sect master, with an extremely honored status. But in fact, he had underestimated her. A saintess of Divine Phoenix Island was even rarer than a Divine Phoenix Island sect master. Divine Phoenix Island changed sect masters every 100 years. Afterwards, they would retire and become an elder ancestor. But, a saintess was rarely seen every 500 years, and not every sect had a saintess. The main branch of Divine Phoenix Island was the ancient Phoenix family, the Mu family. The saintess could only come from the Mu family. The Mu family had excessive yin energy and a lack of yang energy. Because of this, they had very few children. Although there were many disciples of Divine Phoenix Island whose last name was Mu, the truth was that this was only a last name, and it didn't mean that they were true juniors of the Mu family. Every few hundred years, the Mu family would produce a girl who had the bloodline of a phoenix descendant, and her talent would be a heaven-defying 7th grade. She was the saintess. Also, only a saintess would be able to summon their own saint beast. For instance, the vermilion bird that the masked woman was riding was not hers. It was left behind by an ancient saintess who had passed away. The life of a phoenix descendant was much longer than humans. Some phoenix descendants would continue living on even after their master had died, and stay at Divine Phoenix Island for several hundred years or even 1,000 years. Through all these years, Divine Phoenix Island had gathered 3 vermilion birds and a blue luan. One of those vermilion birds was Mu Chenyu's saint beast. As for the blue luan, it was the saint beast of her younger sister, Mu Bingyun. Every time a saintess would appear every 500 years, there was a small chance that there would be a pair of twin sisters born. That was a vermilion bird and a blue luan. If this happened, Divine Phoenix Island would enter incomparably prosperous times. If they were able to grasp this opportunity, they might even be able to upgrade themselves to a 5th grade sect. How does Fairy Maiden prefer to be addressed? Shizongtian stood at the front of the spirit boat leading the way, as the vermilion bird slowly followed behind it. The black-clothed masked woman softly said, "My name is Mu Qinghong." "I see, so it is Fairy Maiden Qinghong. Please." With these words, the spirit boat had already fallen out of sight. Shizongtian led Mu Qinghong to the Grand Hall. As for the person from Peacock Mountain, he was forgotten and left on the side. Naturally, Peacock Mountain didn't have anything to say about this. The difference in their strength was an entire grade. Even if the sovereign of Peacock Mountain was to go to Divine Phoenix Island, he would barely have the qualifications to mix with the elders. Not only that, he would only be equal to an unimportant outer sect elder. In a 3rd grade sect, the elders were at the Xiantian realm. And there might not even be a revolving Dan master. If there was, it would be an extremely rare one or two. In a 4th grade sect, the elders were at the revolving Dan realm. This difference was big. Mu Qinghong and Shizongtian sat side by the side on a dais overlooking the square. Mu Qinghong glanced at all the young talents' cultivation and frowned. Is there really anyone in this small 3rd grade sect that is worthy of Chenyu to give such a high evaluation of? Mu Qinghong muttered to herself. Mu Qinghong was an orphan. But, since her natural martial talent was amazing, she had been given shelter as a child at Divine Phoenix Island, and she had received the surname of Mu. After Mu Chenyu was chosen as the saintess of Divine Phoenix Island, Mu Qinghong was assigned to be her assistant. Mu Qinghong was 19 years older than Mu Chenyu. They had grown up together and the two regarded each other as sisters. Their relationship was very solid. A month ago, Mu Chenyu had returned to Divine Phoenix Island and asked Mu Qinghong to go to the 7 profound valleys to observe a young boy named Lin Ming, saying that he had a very unusual talent and he could become a revolving Dan master in the future. Not only that, he wouldn't be any normal revolving Dan master either. If he were willing to assist Divine Phoenix Island in the future, then the chances of Divine Phoenix Island becoming a 5th grade sect would be much higher. This assessment was simply ridiculous. It could said that Mu Chenyu had already thought of Lin Ming as a talent equal to her own. Around 15 or 16 years old, and his cultivation can break through to the pulse condensation period at any time. His strength far exceeds a martial artist at the same cultivation, and he has an extremely rare martial intent. His body has a strange bloodline that isn't inferior at all to Chenyu's vermilion bird bloodline. His body is special, and he has formidable blood vitality. Also, he can control the purple flood dragon Divine Thunder. Mu Qinghong was recalling the details that Mu Qianyu had told her. If this description wasn't wrong, then such a character would be a talent at the pinnacle of any fourth-grade sect. At this time, the group stages had already started. Mu Qinghong watched for a while, but she didn't spot any thunder attribute martial artists. She pretended to casually ask, Valley Master Shi, in these 10 stages of outstanding young heroes, which ones came from the sect and which ones came from the 36 countries? Mu Qinghong knew that Lin Ming came from Sky Fortune Kingdom. As long as she was able to find out which the competition stage Sky Fortune Kingdom was on, she believed it would be very easy to find Lin Ming. After hearing Mu Qinghong's question, Shi Zongtian thought it was a bit odd. This woman was simply too interested in the 7 Profound Valleys martial meeting. Was she looking for someone? It couldn't possibly be that Divine Phoenix Island came to the 7 Profound Valleys to recruit someone. It shouldn't be. The disciples with the best talent, such as the sword factions Jiang Baoyun or the zither factions Qin Wuxin, had all grown up in their factions and they had learnt their factions' core cultivation methods. If they betrayed their sect to enter Divine Phoenix Island, they would have to switch to the cultivation methods of Divine Phoenix Island. This might do more harm than good. Also, Divine Phoenix Island's cultivation methods weren't suitable for men to cultivate. Although reluctant, Shi Zongtian still described where the martial artists of each stage came from. The 6th stage area? It doesn't look like there's anything special there. At this time at the 6th stage on the martial field, the 3rd round of the martial meeting had started already. Huoluo Nation's Wang Mu was standing on the stage as well as his opponent Zhu Feng, who came from a martial cultivation family. Zhu Feng's cultivation was at the peak of bone forging. Since he was able to stand on this stage with his peak bone forging cultivation, it meant that he was a talent who was able to jump ranks in battle. I'll defeat you in 5 moves. Wang Mu shouted as he took his long sword out. He simply didn't place Zhu Feng in his eyes. You talk so much, aren't you afraid of spitting on your own face? I want to see just how you'll defeat me. Zhu Feng was also an arrogant youth. These words from Wang Mu suddenly caused him to be angry. His opponent was only at the middle pulse condensation period, and yet, he was so rampant. From the very start of the match, Zhu Feng had to resort to using his final master strike. He understood that defeating someone like Wang Mu would be no easy feat, so he had to go all out from the get-go. The ultimate move of the Zhu family had been easily received by Wang Mu. After that, Wang Mu struck out with 3 sword strokes, forcing Zhu Feng into a perilous situation. With the 4th sword stroke, Wang Mu broke through the true essence barrier that was protecting Zhu Feng's body. With the 5th sword stroke, Wang Mu sent Zhu Feng's weapon flying out of his hand. Then, he kicked Zhu Feng in the chest and sent him flying off the stage. 3rd match, Wang Mu wins. The referee announced from the side as he gave Wang Mu a few glances. The referee thought that it was quite good for someone from the 36 countries to have such strength. He should be able to advance into the top 100. If a martial artist from the 36 countries was able to advance into the top 100, this was a result that they could be proud of. After defeating Zhu Feng in 5 moves, Wang Mu looked at Lin Ming haughtily, provocation stirring in his eyes. There are a dozen or so matches still left, then it will be time for our match. Lin Ming only smiled, not saying anything. He turned his head to glance at the competition's schedule table, and just like Wang Mu had said, their gambling match would begin soon enough. Lin Ming had heard that Huoluo Nation's Seraphic Pond contained an incomparably pure heaven and earth origin energy. Not only that, but there would be no side effects from soaking in this pond. He was quite looking forward to it. 4th match, Lin Ming against Chen Xiao. This would be Lin Ming's first match. His opponent, Chen Xiao, came from the 7 Profound Valleys Array faction and his cultivation was at the early pulse condensation period. In the last total faction martial meeting, he had reached rank 105. Although rank 105 didn't sound too impressive, at that time, Chen Xiao had been at peak bone forging. Now 3 years later, his strength had greatly improved from before. And over half of the disciples that had been ahead of him before now were unable to participate in the total faction martial meeting due to their age. It could be said that this time, Chen Xiao would definitely enter the top 100. Mu Qinghong was watching this match from afar. So far, this Lin Ming had matched the description of the youth that Mu Qianyu had described. He looked around 16 or 17 years old, and his cultivation was at the peak bone forging stage, and it might even be enough to enter the pulse condensation period. Mu Qinghong was waiting for Lin Ming to take out his weapon. If it was a spear, then she would be certain. Or, if he used thunder true essence, it would also most certainly confirm her suspicions. The strength of Lin Ming's opponent was just barely passable in Mu Qinghong's eyes. Well, at least, she could see how Lin Ming would deal with his opponent. In the stage, Chen Xiao was holding a small array flag, smiling at Lin Ming. It's already quite good that a peak bone forging boy could stand on this stage. But what a pity, you just ran out of luck, the first person you are up against is me. Chen Xiao didn't even view Lin Ming as an opponent. He was also a talent that could jump up realms to fight opponents. Only a middle pulse condensation period opponent was worth him giving his all to. As for someone with a lower cultivation than him, it was simply something to be settled in a single move. Millimeter? Chen Xiao hadn't finished speaking when he saw that Lin Ming had closed his eyes. What is this fellow doing? Is he looking down on me? Chen Xiao frowned. He wanted to send Lin Ming off stage with a casual move, but seeing Lin Ming's flagrant disrespect, he decided to give Lin Ming a little lesson in humility. Match begins. As the referee's voice stopped, Chen Xiao immediately flourished his array flag and a succession of symbols circled around in his hand like a liquid rainbow. It was truly mesmerizing. But, as soon as Chen Xiao waved his array flag, the beautiful symbols melted together into a sharp and deadly weapon. Compared to all the actions that Chen Xiao had taken, Lin Ming simply opened his eyes. Bang! Countless visions and images poured into Chen Xiao's mind. His body shook, his pupils lost focus, and then, his body slowly slumped to the ground with a hard plop. Lin Ming slowly turned around to leave. The audience that had been sitting around the stage were watching in stunned silence. Millimeter? What happened? Did that martial artist called Lin Ming even make a move? His actions were too fast, I wasn't even able to clearly see it. He hadn't moved, he only gave him a look. How is that possible? Because it was the group stages, the sixth group that Lin Ming was in didn't have a direct disciple of the 7 profound valleys. Thus, there weren't many people in the audience. Most of the audience were in different areas watching the more famous and well-known disciples. As for the audience that was here, their own martial cultivation wasn't too high, so they couldn't see the mysterious and strange principles that had just occurred. It was actually a soul attack. Mu Qinghong's slender eyebrows pressed together. Mu Qianyu hadn't said that Lin Ming was able to use soul attacks. She had been counting on Lin Ming using a spear or thunder true essence, but she didn't think that Lin Ming would be able to use just a soul attack to achieve victory. Was it possible that Lin Ming's soul attack was more powerful than his spear play? Or was his opponent not worthy of him using his spear? Chapter 244 Standing Out as an Amazing Talent. Chapter 244 Standing Out as an Amazing Talent. Chapter 244 Standing Out as an Amazing Talent. I see, so that's the Soul Force genius that caused an uproar recently. In the contestant waiting area, a youth with half a silver mask on was sipping a cup of tea, leisurely observing the arena. Watching his demeanor, it was evident that he never placed this group stage in his heart. The mask he wore was very strange, it only covered the right half of his face. But from what was exposed, one could see that he was a handsome man with a feminine and delicate atmosphere. This masked man did have the qualifications to be proud, his cultivation had reached the late pulse condensation period, and he was also a core disciple of the 7 Profound Valleys Mirage faction. He was also one of the seeded contestants in the 6th group. There was a gigantic difference in strength between the core disciples and ordinary disciples of the 7 Profound Valleys. A core disciple had outstanding talent, but also had much more resources. Because of this, their strength was usually several times more than an ordinary disciple. Oh, is Big Brother interested in this boy? A youth beside the masked man asked. The youth was carrying a teapot with an extremely attentive look, ready to refill the teacup whenever needed. He's not worth me being interested in him. It's just that I also happen to know how to use a soul attack, and I want to use him to practice a bit. Big brother thinks too much of him. For Big Brother to use a soul attack on a peak bone forging boy is the same as using a giant knife to kill a chicken. The youth seized the opportunity to flatter the masked man. This youth was just an ordinary disciple of the 7 profound valleys. The resources that the 7 profound valleys supplied to their ordinary disciples was much less than a core disciple. Therefore, there were many ordinary disciples that hung on the coattails of core disciples, hoping to obtain some advantages. Millimeter, it's my turn to go on stage. The masked man heard the referee call his name out and he stood up, walking onto the stage. After seeing his match, his eyes brightened. What luck! The first match that he had was against a quite beautiful woman. Not only that, but she was young, yet her cultivation was decently high. She really was a top-quality girl. I am the Mirage Factions by Tinghua. Beautiful lady, will you admit defeat? Or would you like me to help you admit defeat? Bai Tinghua grinned as he said this. The young girl in front of him was only at the middle bone forging stage, her cultivation was an entire realm less than his, how could she possibly be his opponent? Qin Xingxuan grit her teeth. She didn't know that her first match would be against such a strong opponent. Xingxuan, admit defeat. Lin Ming shouted out from outside the stage. Lin Ming had a good estimation of Qin Xingxuan's strength. At most, she would be able to defeat an early pulse condensation period martial artist. If she encountered a middle pulse condensation period martial artist, she would still be able to put up a decent fight. But against someone who had reached the late pulse condensation period, her chances fell precipitously. Not only that, but he wasn't regular late pulse condensation martial artist either. Qin Xingxuan let out a light breath, and somewhat grudgingly said, I admit defeat. Bai Tinghua, victory. The referee announced. Qin Xingxuan was a bit dispirited. She had lost without even being able to put up a fight. Lin Ming gently patted Qin Xingxuan's shoulder and consoled her, saying, there's nothing to be sad about. You're only 15 years old, you have plenty of time left. In 3 years' time, this stage will be yours. Millimeter. Qin Xingxuan nodded, her mood much better. Bai Tinghua also seemed as if he had some regrets. But then, he looked at Lin Ming and then at Qin Xingxuan and he suddenly grinned. It seemed like the relationship between these two wasn't so simple. Things were getting much more interesting. Wouldn't it be fun if he could beat the lover of a beautiful girl in front of her? Bai Tinghua walked off stage and his little attendant immediately walked up with a bright welcoming smile. Congratulations on your well-deserved victory, Big Brother Tinghua. She's just a little girl. It's nothing much if she can't beat me. But, that little girl's talent is quite good. She would be top class if she was placed even in the group of core disciples of the 7 profound valleys. She will most likely enter the total faction at some time in the future. As Bai Tinghua thought this, the referee announced, 6th match, Chen Xiaohu against Ling Sen. Chen Xiaohu was the little personal attendant that had been attentively pouring tea for Bai Tinghua. Although this fellow was a sycophantic little suck-up, his cultivation was still decent, and he had reached the early pulse condensation period. The fact that he was able to pass the Mountain Gate trial showed that he had some skills. Chen Xiaohu excitedly stood up as he heard his name being called. Big brother, it's my turn to go up on stage. This little brother will be right back. Bai Tinghua was less optimistic about Chen Xiaohu's chances. He glanced at Chen Xiaohu's opponent's cultivation and he was shocked. Early bone forging? Really? How had he managed to pass through the Mountain Gate trial? Was he a martial artist that excelled in movement techniques? At the Mountain Gate trial, martial artists that specialized in movement techniques had a great advantage over martial artists that specialized in other technique. They could stumble their way through even if their true power wasn't optimal. Haha, big brother, my luck is just too good. I can't believe that I'm able to face an early bone forging fellow. Not only that, but he comes from the 36 countries. I think this fellow is probably only good at movement techniques. Chen Xiaohu hadn't even got on the stage yet, but he was already imagining his imminent victory. There was an entire cultivation realm between them, and since this person came from the 36 countries, Chen Xiaohu wasn't feeling pressured in the least. Match, start. The referee's voice had just stopped when Chen Xiaohu rushed forwards, his hands shaped like a tiger's claw. He wanted to end this battle quickly. If he couldn't defeat some lowly early bone condensation martial artist from the 36 bumpkin countries with his early pulse condensation period cultivation, then he would lose too much face. This little brother had to prove that he had some value, otherwise, no boss would be willing to keep such a waste of a little brother around. Facing Chen Xiaohu's tiger claw, Ling Sen calmly stepped forwards. He hadn't even taken the heavy sword out on his back, when his aura suddenly erupted outwards. Murderous intent spread out as if it were blotting out the sky, and the air on stage immediately began to thicken. The slaughter domain had opened. Chen Xiaohu only saw his surroundings change as he suddenly appeared in a bloody area, facing countless Ashura devils. These Ashura devils gave out horrifying shrieks as they started rushing towards him. Chen Xiaohu had always been a man with a weak mind that sucked up to others. How could his heart of martial arts ever be strong enough to break Ling Sen's slaughter domain apart? Chen Xiaohu's mind was in chaos as he panicked. His swordsmanship was full of holes. In fact, he couldn't even see Ling Sen, there were only countless Ashura devils surrounding him. Ling Sen took a casual step towards Chen Xiaohu and sent a punch out. Bang! Chen Xiaohu flew backwards until he dropped off stage, still in a confused daze. Sixth match, Ling Sen, victory. The referee gave Ling Sen a deep glance. To him, Ling Sen was even more surprising than Lin Ming. He was able to substantialize his murderous intent into a domain. The fact that he could use his murderous intent to this degree was simply incredible. An early bone-forging martial artist had actually been able to easily defeat an early pulse condensation period martial artist. Although Chen Xiaohu's strength was ordinary, he was still a disciple of the 7 profound valleys. His strength should be much stronger than an equivalent martial artist from the 36 countries. The audience was looking around at each other, clueless as to what had just happened. What was going on? Was Chen Xiaohu play-acting like some dumb monkey? How come he just watched as his opponent punched him in the face? Chen Xiaohu climbed back up from the ground, his face pallid as he ran away. He was scared just remembering all those devils surrounding him. He didn't dare face Ling Sen again, it was almost as if he were facing a real Ashura devil. Boss. Chen Xiaohu was still shaken from his experience. He had actually lost to an early bone-forging martial artist. He was too ashamed to lift his head up. Bai Tinghua simply ignored Chen Xiaohu, his eyes were only looking at Ling Sen who was still standing on stage. He cupped his chin. The martial artists from the 36 countries are more and more interesting. It seems that I've been underestimating them. The matches would proceed one at a time, and every person would have to face 15 competitors one at a time. Finally, the ones with the highest number of victories would advance. At the 12th match, Lin Ming's eyes finally brightened, so there's actually such a master in the 6th group. The 6th group didn't have a direct disciple of the 7 profound valleys. Lin Ming had thought that Bai Tinghua was the strongest one here, but now, he actually saw there that was a true blue master in his group. This young man's cultivation was at the peak of pulse condensation, and not only that, but his aura was extremely shocking, enough to frighten anyone that looked at him. He was like a peerless treasure sword that stood loftily above the stage. His glance was like a sword light that pierced the heart. Even if someone were to look at him, they would have to withstand a great pressure. Sword factions Jiang Lanjian, please advise me. Jiang Lanjian hands gripped the sword hilt in a polite martial artist's duel ceremony. Before this, Jiang Lanjian had been watching the previous matches. In his opinion, even though Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua had shown some promise, neither of them were capable of being his match. Therefore, because he hadn't seen anything of interest, Jiang Lanjian hadn't shown up until now. Please, advise me. Jiang Lanjian's hapless opponent was an early pulse condensation period martial artist from Huoluo Nation. At this point in time, the Huoluo Nation youth was no more than an eggplant to be beaten up. In his heart, he had already given up. Match, start. The referee shouted. The Huoluo Nation disciple hesitated for a moment before finally raising his hand, I admit defeat. This youth knew full well that he had already lost. There was no need to further disgrace himself. If the difference in their strength weren't any less, then he would still try and put up a fight to obtain some experience. But now, the difference in their strength had become a moat that stood between them. He would be defeated in a second. If it were like this, then he wouldn't be able to learn anything, and he might as well save his energy to deal with his next opponent. Jiang Lanjian, victory, the referee announced. Jiang Lanjian turned around and left the stage. Before leaving, his shot a glance towards Lin Ming, his vision sweeping over him. He didn't pause his steps as he left. Although this Jiang Lanjian isn't a direct disciple, his strength isn't too far away from a direct disciple. In terms of battle prowess, the disciples of the Seven Profound Valleys sword faction are the strongest within the entire sect. I look forwards to fighting with him. Lin Ming's heart began to smolder with fighting spirit. 21st match, Lin Ming against Wang Mu. Finally, it was time for Lin Ming and Wang Mu's gambling fight to occur. With the referee's announcement, Qin Zia and Martial House Master Luo in the audience instantly came to attention. The two of them hadn't been sitting too far away, and with the announcement from the referee, the two middle-aged men looked at each other, a faint smile crossing each of their faces. Qin Zia turned his attention towards the martial stage. Martial House Master Luo stroked his chin and said, "I admit that I underestimated Lin Ming. But if he wants to win against Wang Mu, it won't be so easy. Just you wait and see." After Lin Ming had instantly defeated Chen Xiao, he had the potential to reach the top 100. However, Wang Mu still looked at him with contempt in his heart. His cultivation was much higher than that Chen Xiao. Still, he had to be cautious facing Lin Ming lest he end up in a miserable state. Before the match began, Wang Mu condensed true essence within his body, forming a film of true essence that covered him. To Wang Mu, true essence manifestation skills like this weren't anything difficult. Oh! A true essence shield that can defend against soul attacks. I didn't think that you would have practiced this sort of technique. Humph. Since I dared to take your bet, then I have already figured you out. I already know about the matter in Desert Flower Hall where you used Soul Force to defeat Ouyang Ziyun, and I've already figured out how to defend against it. Chapter 245. A second to defeat Wang Mu. Chapter 245. A second to defeat Wang Mu. Chapter 245, a second to defeat Wang Mu. Soul Force attacks had especially wonderful results if they were used on an opponent that wasn't aware of the situation. Under the circumstances where the difference in strength and cultivation wasn't too great, one could instantly defeat the other in a single second. But, if one had made early preparations and was aware of the incoming soul attack, then the situation would be different. However, normal martial artists would never practice this sort of martial skill simply because martial artists that used their soul force to launch an attack were too rare. Only when a martial artist has reached the Xiantian realm and began to cultivate their soul and similar techniques would such attacks surface. Before the Xiantian realm, martial artists usually only cultivated their true essence and physical body. This is a bit interesting. It seems that Wang Mu already has a martial skill prepared to deal with soul force attacks. How will Lin Ming handle this situation? I don't think that Lin Ming has many other attack methods. Looking at him, he only appears to be 16 or 17 years old. Soul force attacks are too difficult to learn and master. Just cultivating one is enough to occupy all his time. Where would he find the energy to study anything else? I hear that Lin Ming was also able to control thunder. I wonder what grade his lightning fusion is at. If it's high, it might be of some use. As people talked, Lin Ming and Wang Mu had already both risen to prominence. They had attracted many viewers. There were even some audience members and martial artists from other stages that came to watch. It was basically determined that Lin Ming and Wang Mu would both qualify. In the future, they might encounter one of these two, so it was better to come watch in advance and have an understanding of their opponent's strength. In the arena, the match had already begun. But Wang Mu actually hadn't moved yet. Instead, he strengthened his defensive turtle shell. Now that your soul force attacks no longer work, I wonder how you will fight me. Wang Mu brutishly spit out. I see you crammed your study time in order to learn a soul defense. You seem quite confident. Lin Ming still hadn't taken out his spear. Since everyone had assumed that he was a soul force attack genius, then he would just go with the flow. He had already decided that unless he met a master which soul force was useless against, then he would use the samsara martial intent as his only attack. This wasn't just to hide his strength. If he constantly uses his samsara martial intent, then he would be able to deepen the understanding of his samsara martial intent and gain a higher realm of comprehension. Lin Ming was becoming closer and closer to the Hutian and Xiantian realm. Sooner or later, Lin Ming would have to cultivate his soul. If he waited until then to ponder and understand how the samsara martial intent was related to his soul, then it would be too late. So, if he was given an opportunity to practice his samsara martial intent, of course he wouldn't miss it. Wang Mu's face flushed red. He coldly snorted, "Even if I don't have a soul defense, I can still crush you with my cultivation. I'm not afraid of you." As his voice fell, Wang Mu took out 2 swords from his spatial ring. He gripped a long sword in his right hand and a dagger in his left. Dual blade user? The audience's eyes lit up. They hadn't thought that Wang Mu would be a dual blade user. Before this, Wang Mu had only fought with his left hand. To use 2 blades was much more difficult than a single sword, but once one managed to master this power, then they would be a force to be reckoned with. The 2 blade styles combine and complement each other. Wang Mu's true essence began to rapidly revolve within his body. A deep purple color glimmered around the long sword and the dagger, as light glinted off the tip. Wang Mu took a fierce step forwards and his long sword thrust out, followed with his dagger, a piercing sound breaking through the air. Seeing Wang Mu's blade stab out, Lin Ming remained motionless. His eyes suddenly flashed with a black light. The samsara martial intent had begun. Bang! Wang Mu felt as if his body were struck by a powerful force. The sword wind that was twirling around his blades scattered into nothing with the loss of his soul force supporting it. Wang Mu paled as he stepped back, his heart filled with a surprised anger. His opponent's soul force was simply like a sword light. Although it had managed to penetrate his soul force defense, it had been greatly weakened in the process. Even so, it had caused his spiritual sea to tremble. In that instant, he had seen countless illusions and had almost lost himself in that imaginary vortex. And worst of all, once his spiritual sea was struck, then he wouldn't be able to control his true essence. Any gorgeous or magnificent martial skill that he was using would be wasted. I have to strengthen my soul force defense, but my true essence is limited. If I strengthen my soul force defense, then my attack power will naturally weaken along with it. If I don't have enough true essence, can I still use that move? At this point I don't have any other choice. Wang Mu grit his teeth and pushed his true essence to the extreme. The 2 blades in his hands began to rotate at an astonishing speed. Double blade vortex. True essence formed an air current that began to swirl around the blades. A black vortex emerged from between the 2 swords, recklessly spinning as it grew larger and larger. A foul, evil and cold air began to whisper in the wind, constantly emanating from that vortex. However, when Wang Mu was about to strike out with this double-bladed vortex, he was completely stunned as he watched the audience around him melt into nothingness. The skies evaporated and the ground vanished. He was suddenly a single person standing in an endless empty space. In the sky, there were 2 massive jet-black vortexes that were savagely swirling around. When Wang Mu looked at these vortexes, it was as if he could see the profound void and the endless universe contained within. Compared to these 2 titanic black vortexes, his own double-sword vortex was absolutely nothing. In that moment, a glimmer of dread and anguish appeared in Wang Mu's mind. In a battle of soul force, a single momentary flaw in the mind would spell instant defeat. Peng! Wang Mu's soul force defense film completely broke apart. Countless shadows and images flooded into Wang Mu's mind, surging through his spiritual sea, completely cutting off all his contact with the outside world. Peng! Peng! With the sound of metal hitting stone, both of Wang Mu's blades fell to the ground. His eyes dilated, his pupils blurred over, his face whitened, he foamed from the mouth, and a moment later, he slumped to the ground. In this duel, he had been thoroughly defeated. Seeing Wang Mu's defeat, Martial House Master Luo's expression became extremely ugly. Qin Zia cupped his hands together and smiled as he sent a true essence sound transmission, saying, "Thank you Martial House Master Luo for so generously gifting us with the seraphic pond. It was a good game." Although the words sounded polite, they were actually full of sarcasm, grating on Martial House Master Luo's ears as he heard them. Wang Mu had been defeated with only having used half a skill, but Lin Ming actually hadn't moved at all. He had only glanced at Wang Mu twice. How was this possible? How could a peak bone forging boy defeat someone at the middle pulse condensation period? Not only that, but Wang Mu wasn't any ordinary middle pulse condensation martial artist. Even in the entire 7 profound valleys there weren't many people that could do this. Just what was this Lin Ming's sole talent at? Medium 6th grade? Or maybe a superior 6th grade that was only spoken of in the ancient texts? A 6th grade soul talent was much rarer than a 6th grade martial talent. To have a superior 6th grade soul talent was simply unimaginable. Lin Ming, victory. The referee promptly announced. After defeating Wang Mu, Lin Ming was already at the front of his group. He was only behind Jiang Lanjian and Bai Tinghua. It was already certain that he would pass the group stages. This Lin Ming is simply too terrifying. He was actually able to defeat a middle pulse condensation period martial artist with just his soul force. Could he do the same with a late pulse condensation period martial artist? Late pulse condensation. It should be impossible. Even a top-level talent of the 7 profound valleys could not do this. Even the direct disciples of the total faction would not be able to defeat a late pulse condensation period master when only at the peak of bone forging. Well, it's different. After all, he is a soul force attack expert. It simply isn't the right path to walk to use such skills. Although it has a great effect now, later it will create a very big bottleneck, especially after the Xiantian realm when everyone begins to cultivate their soul. At that time, others' soul force won't be much weaker, rendering his soul attacks useless. They would have to reach the Xiantian realm first. How many of the geniuses present would be able to reach the Xiantian realm? 1 out of 20. 1 out of 30. In any case, I'm not prepared to deal with this abnormal freak. If I run into him, I'll just admit defeat. Since I'm only at the early pulse condensation period, chances are, I will also be defeated in a second. I'll save my strength to deal with someone else. This thought of the 7 profound valley disciple was also what most of the other martial artists were thinking. There were a total of 10 that could leave this group. Most of them weren't sure that they would be able to deal with Lin Ming, so they could only forfeit their match if they encountered him. In the profound Sky Mountain's Great Hall, Mu Qinghong had been watching the entire match from afar. She had already determined that this soul attack youth was Lin Ming, the young boy that Chen Yu had spoken about. Unless Lin Ming hadn't come to participate in the 7 Profound Valleys total faction martial meeting. This Lin Ming still hasn't used a weapon, and neither has he conjured any of his thunder true essence. It seems he's preparing to reach first place in his group. Mu Qinghong had seen that there were a few 7 Profound Valley disciples in Lin Ming's group that were decent. It wouldn't be easy for Lin Ming to defeat them with his young 16 years of age. He's so young and yet he gives off a mystifying aura, as if I'm looking into a deep well. Even though Chen Yu described him, I still don't know just how many cards he has in his hand. At this time, Sky Fortune Kingdom's 7 Profound Martial House. The semi-annual Martial House entrance examination had just ended, and a group of lucky fellows had entered the 7 Profound Martial House. These lucky ones could be described as the favored talents of heaven, flushed with success. As long as nothing went wrong, they would be able to do many great things after they graduated. They could join the army and be a commander, or, if they didn't want to join the army, they could stay in their respected families and serve as great political figures. Regardless of what path they chose, they had one glory for their family. Not only that, but they would also have a ridiculously high income. A normal family could struggle for an entire year, performing hard labor and only earn 10 or so gold taels, but these talents would be able to relax and earn several hundred taels of gold per year. Thinking of their future livelihood full of abundance, these young disciples that had grown up under the aura of being a genius couldn't restrain their smug smiles. According to the rules, The new disciples of the martial house needed to visit the 10,000 killing array and the ranking stone under the guidance of their new instructor. This allowed them to see the top-ranking talents and also motivate them to practice well. Before they reached the ranking stone, they saw that many people had gathered at a temple-like building. It was completely bustling with activity. At the side of this temple, there was also an expensive and well-dressed young man sitting at the side of the building as if he was waiting for something. "What is that?" a 16-year-old young female disciple asked as she pointed at the weird-looking altar in the middle of the temple. The middle of the altar was surrounded with exquisitely beautiful and sparkling crystal stones. "What beautiful crystals!" The young girl's eyes shone. "What crystal? Are you an idiot? That's a true essence stone. It's a pure true essence stone worth 1,000 gold taels." Many of the martial house disciples came from large and respected families, so they had extraordinary natural insight into these mysterious objects. 1,000 gold taels, with so many, that has to be several tens of thousands of gold taels. The young girl clutched her gasping mouth. In the ordinary world, a common family only earned 10 gold taels of income per year. But now, there was an astronomical figure of several tens of thousands of gold taels. It was a number she couldn't understand. I wonder what sort of array formation will use so many true essence stones. This is just too luxurious. The youth who spoke pursed his lips. Although he came from a large family, he was still distressed seeing so many true essence stones used in an array formation. "It's a sound transmission array." At this time, a middle-aged instructor opened his mouth to speak. "It's a sound transmission array to deliver a message from the 7 profound valleys total faction. The array is separated by several 100,000 miles. In order to transmit one message, it will consume 36 true essence stones." "What? It takes that many true essence stones to send a message?" Even those disciples that came from large families were startled beyond compare. A message that was worth several tens of thousands of gold taels? What a joke! What sort of news was this? Could only an emperor listen to it? Chapter 246 Hope. Chapter 246 Hope. Chapter 246 Hope. Instructor, what sort of news is worth 36 true essence stones to send? Is it a combat report from the frontline battlefield? The youth who asked came from a military family. In his opinion, only a combat report of Sky Fortune Kingdom was worth spending 36 true essence stones on. After all, victory or defeat in war was related to the destiny of a nation. The middle-aged instructor shook his head and said, "A frontline combat report wouldn't use a sound transmission array. Our 7 profound martial house isn't a messenger for Sky Fortune Kingdom. A sound transmission array formation that could pass a message through several 100,000 miles wasn't something that could simply be created on a whim. Not even Sky Fortune Kingdom's Imperial Palace could hope to ever construct something like this. Then what sort of news is being sent?" The young boys' and girls' eyes were filled with curiosity. They were at the age where they were intensely inquisitive into all things. "This transmission array will send a victory report from the Total Faction Martial Meeting. It will be sent tonight," the middle-aged instructor replied. "Millimeter. Total Faction Martial Meeting?" Most disciples' faces were filled with befuddlement. None of them knew what that was. After all, the common person was rarely exposed to such a high-level existence. Even the 7 profound valleys that stood behind the 7 profound martial house was an incomparably vague concept. They simply didn't know just how strong the 7 profound valleys actually were. The 7 profound valleys set up a total faction martial meeting and gathered the talents of all the countries together to compare their strengths. Although the middle-aged instructor knew that this wouldn't make much sense to these new disciples, nor did it matter to them, he still patiently explained it. "Oh, the geniuses of all the countries gather together." As a youth heard this, his eyes suddenly shone. He was the first-place candidate of this time's entrance examination, the freshman disciple named Huayu. Huayu also came from a large, respected family, and at 15 years old, his cultivation was at the viscera training stage, his strength is quite all right. When the middle-aged teacher had said that the talents of all the countries would gather together, Huayu felt incomparably enthusiastic, burning with fighting spirit. He said, "Instructor, When can I participate? What rank would I be able to get? The middle-aged instructor didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. He said, "You can't go." Why? Huai Yu felt as if he had been slapped. He was the #1 candidate in the 7 Profound Martial House entrance examination. He could be considered the most talented young martial artist of Sky Fortune Kingdom within the last half year. With such a proud and worthy title, how could he not even participate? The middle-aged instructor sighed with poignancy. This youth was merely a superior 4th-grade talent. Only if he was an inestimable surprise like Ling Sen or Lin Ming would he ever be able to reach the level needed to contact the total faction. He didn't want to ruin to the youth's self-confidence, so he tried a different tactic. "Do you see that well-dressed man in the robe near the transmission array? Millimeter? I see." Huai Yu turned his head and saw a man in a brocaded robe. He was sitting in a mahogany chair near the altar and was looking a bit anxious at the moment. He is the current dynasty's crown prince. News from the total faction martial meeting will only arrive during the evening, yet it is only noon and he's waiting here. Do you know what this means? What? Crown prince? His Highness the Crown Prince. He is the current dynasty's crown prince. All of the youths gasped in complete and utter surprise, their eyes wide with incredulity as if they couldn't believe their eyes. To the common people, the Crown Prince was a legendary figure they had only ever heard about. The Crown Prince was waiting here even though the news came in the evening. Not only that, but the price of the transmission array was 36 pure true essence stones. All of these implied just how important this news was. This also meant that this unknown total faction martial meeting had an extraordinary significance. The middle-aged instructor let out a sigh. He didn't envy these heavenly favored talents when there was the grand stage where countless talents that were above them reigned. That was the true world. Casually choosing any one of these talents was like taking a small rock front a giant mountain of stones. Do you understand now? This total faction martial meeting is grander than you can imagine. All of the talents, geniuses, and young heroes from all the countries and numerous martial families will gather in the 7 Profound Valleys total faction. It is simply impossible for you to stand on that stage. Let alone you, even the core disciples of the martial house cannot. There are many inferior 5th-grade talents and medium 5th-grade talents that have no hope of going. Not even a medium 5th-grade talent has a chance. Huai Yu was shocked. To say it more directly, he was only a superior 4th-grade talent. A 5th-grade talent was only born once a decade in the entire Sky Fortune Kingdom. In his opinion, this kind of existence would simply be a son of God. But, since this tournament is so important, then how come we've never heard of it? Huai Yu asked the question that all the other new disciples were wondering. If this martial meeting were truly so grand, how come no one had ever heard of it before? The middle-aged instructor explained, that is because, in all these years, this martial meeting had held no significance for our Sky Fortune Kingdom. Every 3 years, the 7 Profound Martial House will send out 5 disciples to participate in this tournament. However, usually 4 out of the 5 sent would come from the 4 martial families that live on the edge of Sky Fortune Kingdom. Every so often, even all 5 of them would come from the 4 martial families, and our Sky Fortune Kingdom would have no share in participating. I had said that even a medium 5th-grade talent may not necessarily participate in the martial meeting. It's the same for the other countries and martial families too. Our Sky Fortune Kingdom only produces a 5th-grade talent every 10 years. They do have a large chance of participating, but... The middle-aged instructor paused here, and shook his head before continuing, that is only in terms of filling the quota of people that we send. Actually, there is a mountain gate trial that most cannot even pass, and they are eliminated from the martial meeting. A few years ago, the 4 martial families produced a disciple named Mu Yinju who managed to reach the top 100. That was the most joyous and proud moment for our 7 Profound Martial House. However, that was only the pride of the martial house and the pride of the 4 great martial families. It had nothing to do with our Sky Fortune Kingdom. A martial family wouldn't necessarily only have a single last name. A child would follow their father's last name, and if a daughter were to marry someone else, her children would follow her husband's last name. Mu Yinju was talented because he had the bloodline of his father, a wandering martial artist that roamed the world and wasn't a Sky Fortune citizen. An outer disciple inevitably could not compare to someone in the martial family that shared the main lineage. Even Mu Yinju couldn't be considered a true member of the four great martial families. Proud to reach the top 100? Our Sky Fortune Kingdom has so many talents, how can they not reach the top 100? How many countries participate in the Total Faction Martial Meeting? It's not a question of how many countries participate. It's that our Sky Fortune Kingdom has simply too wide a gap compared to those ancient and glorious martial families and sects. When the disciples of the 7 profound valleys are at your age, it's only considered extremely ordinary to have a cultivation at the peak of altering muscle. Hua Yu stared with wide eyes. He hadn't yet reached 16 years old and his cultivation was at middle viscera training stage. This was already considered very good, good enough that even the family head had praised him. But peak altering muscle at 15 years of age? What sort of concept was that? And that was only ordinary. Was this some sort of joke? Was he lying? The middle-aged instructor sighed. It's shameful to say this, but the last time someone born from the Sky Fortune Kingdom had reached the top 100 rankings was 50 or 60 years ago. Even having someone pass the Mountain Gate trial was 15 years ago. This was truly shameful for our Sky Fortune Kingdom, and also for our 7 profound martial house. I am an instructor of the martial house who was born in Sky Fortune Kingdom, and even I feel disgraced just mentioning this subject. That is why I didn't wish to speak of the Total Faction Martial Meeting. While conversing, they had finally arrived before the ranking stone. Gazing up, they could view the numerous names engraved upon the large ranking stone. These were the talents of Sky Fortune Kingdom's 7 profound martial house. The higher one's ranking, the larger their name would be. The first row only had one name, Lin Ming. Following closely behind Lin Ming were Ling Sen and Ta Ku. In another half-month, these 3 names would be removed from this ranking stone. Ling Sen and Ta Ku would graduate, and Lin Ming would become a core disciple. Thinking this, the middle-aged instructor felt very melancholic. Lin Ming was once his student. Although he had only taught him for a few days, Lin Ming was the most outstanding and wonderful student that he had ever taught in his entire life. It had left a deep and profound impression on him. Lin Ming. It's Lin Ming. Wow, I'm so excited. I can actually see the name of my idol in first place. That's right, Instructor Hong. Did Mr. Lin Ming participate in this year's Total Faction Martial Meeting? The name of Lin Ming resounded like thunder in the ears of these young martial artists. He was without a doubt the utter and complete inspiration of those in every youthful martial arts circle. These young boys and girls couldn't help but ask this question. He participated. Of course he participated. Hong Shi took a deep breath, and his somewhat disconsolate eyes began to suddenly shine with a flashing and glorious brilliance, like a sleeping lion that had woken up. Can Lin Ming reach the top 100? A young girl whispered. Of course he can. He definitely will. Not only will he reach the top 100, but he will reach the top 50, even the top 30. Hong Shi subconsciously gripped his fists, his emotions surging like the tide. It was like the one participating in the Total Faction Martial Meeting wasn't Lin Ming, but himself. In Lin Ming, he had placed all his hopes. His eyes shifted towards the direction of the 7 profound valleys. Across all those endless miles and rivers and valleys, Lin Ming and his group of 3 had enormous hopes placed upon them. This wasn't only the hope of the instructors within the 7 profound martial house, but was also the hope of all the generations of martial artists within Sky Fortune Kingdom. When the 3rd round began, Lin Ming met with 3 forfeits. It was not only him, but also Jiang Lanjian and Bai Tinghua who had opponents admitting defeat as the match started. In the group stages, one only had to be in the top 10 to advance. There was no need to fight in every match. Then, it was time for lunch. Lin Ming, 5 matches, 5 victories. Ling Sen, 5 matches, 5 victories. Qin Xingxuan's luck was quite bad. She had already lost 3 matches. Her chances of qualifying for the next stage were becoming increasingly precarious. Although she had long expected this result, and knew that the main reason she lost was not because of her talent but because of her age, Qin Xingxuan still felt a bit disappointed. During this martial meeting, her journey would most likely end at the group stages. But 3 years from now, this would become her stage. After 5 matches, Lin Ming had already gained some fame. As for Ling Sen, the matches he had met were a bit weaker, so his fame was also correspondingly smaller. There were some people trying to take advantage of the situation and were beginning to estimate the future rankings. They had even opened up gambling houses. The 7 profound valleys would not interfere in this. In fact, the ones that opened these gambling houses were usually the children of the elders. Their backgrounds weren't small. For them, the gambling house was merely a pleasurable pastime. It was difficult to judge the strength of a participant in the group stages, so the gambling house wouldn't necessarily make any profit. During lunchtime, Qin Xingxuan smiled at Lin Ming and praised, "Lin Ming, you're chosen as one of the seeded players in the gambling house. Your odds aren't too bad." "Oh, what are my odds of winning the whole thing?" Lin Ming casually asked. If the compensation rate was good, he might consider placing a bet on himself. Well, you have no odds of winning the championship." Qin Xingxuan didn't think that the first question Lin Ming would ask was what his rates were for winning the entire martial meeting. Even her, who had utter faith in Lin Ming, wasn't very optimistic in Lin Ming's chances of winning the championship. Chapter 247, Out of the Group Stages and into the Top 100. Chapter 247, Out of the Group Stages and into the Top 100. It was true that Lin Ming was strong. However, the several direct disciples of the 7 profound valleys were simply too terrifying. They were all at the peak of pulse condensation, an entire realm of cultivation higher than Lin Ming. Not only that, but they were also talents that were able to jump ranks in combat. They were stronger than an ordinary middle Hutian realm master. No matter how fierce Lin Ming was, it was simply impossible for him to cross almost 2 realms in order to fight with a middle Hutian realm master. If it was possible, then it would perturb the entire 7 profound valleys. Qin Xingxuan said, there were 20 candidates that were selected as possible champions. These are almost all of the 7 profound valley core disciples, as well as the most popular seeded participants in the 10 groups. Jiang Lanjian is also a choice, and his compensation rate is 120. There is also someone from a martial cultivation family who has been selected, Zhong Yangzhao, and his compensation rate is 135. Zhong Yangzhao? Lin Ming felt that this name was someone familiar. He thought back and recalled that during the ruckus in Desert Flower Hall, one of Ouyang Ziyun's minions had mentioned this name. Zhong Yangzhao from the Zhong family had managed to reach the top 20 in the last total faction martial meeting, but, compared to the top 10 ranking 7 profound valley direct disciples, the difference was simply too great. This time he had practiced for 3 years and hoped to attain success with his hard work. Ever since the 7 profound valleys had started to hold their total faction martial meeting, the first place champion had always been won by a 7 profound valleys core disciple. It had never fallen into the hand of outsiders. It was already quite good that Zhong Yangzhao had been selected as one of the 20 possible champions and could obtain a 135 compensation rate. Yes. Did you say I was selected as a seeded participant? Lin Ming asked. You had just been selected as one of the seeded players in the 36 countries. But, you have to place first within all the disciples of the 36 countries. There are 7 chosen candidates. Your compensation rate is 1:6. 1:6. It seems my compensation rate isn't that high. I shouldn't be in the front of the ranks, right? Millimeter. The ones with the highest rank in the 36 countries are the brother-sister pair from Grace Venerate Nation. Both of them have a cultivation of the middle pulse condensation period, and are about to enter into the late pulse condensation period. Both of their odds are 1:2. Grace Venerate Nation. Because their countries were too far away, Lin Ming had never seen this country and had only heard some rumors. Grace Venerate Nation was an extremely mysterious country, and its landmass was smaller than the Sky Fortune Kingdom. However, their power was even greater than Huoluo Nation. Lin Ming recalled this for a moment. He grinned at Qin Xingxuan and said, Xingxuan, if you want to win some money to eat at Desert Flower Hall, then you can bet on me. Ha ha. Well, the truth is I already placed 20 true essence stones on you. Qin Xingxuan mumbled, somewhat embarrassed. This was only a scenario that she had speculated would happen. Although Lin Ming might not be able to become the champion, Qin Xingxuan had absolute faith in him that he could easily dispatch the brother and sister pair from Grace Venerate Nation. Up to now, Lin Ming still hadn't used his spear. After lunch, the afternoon round of matches would begin. The match schedule had been specifically arranged, there were no lots that were drawn. The reasoning behind this was so that the seeded players did not meet in the group matches, and that martial artists from similar families would be placed as far away from each other as possible. Each of the 21 individuals in Lin Ming's group had to fight a total of 15 matches. This was so that the top 30 seeded players would be able to stagger each other. Lin Ming had managed to not encounter Bai Tinghua, Jiang Lanjian, Ling Sen, or Qin Xingxuan. There were too many forfeits that occurred in the afternoon matches, so Lin Ming hadn't really faced anyone. That was, until his 7th round, where Lin Ming encountered a middle pulse condensation period martial artist who was his opponent. This was a disciple of the 7 Profound Valleys refiner faction, Sun Dong. Sun Dong's cultivation was at the middle pulse condensation period, and he already had quite good results in the group stage. It shouldn't be too difficult for him to pass the group stages. Not only that, but as a disciple of the refiner faction, he was especially skilled in defend against and restrain soul force attack martial artists. Sun Dong very confidently walked onto the stage. On top of his head, a 3-foot large furnace was twirling around. "You are quite strong, but it won't be easy to defeat me. Although my 7 Profound Valleys refiner faction disciples aren't that skilled in martial skills and cultivation methods, but in terms of soul force power, our strength is far beyond that of ordinary martial artist. Your soul attacks are simply useless against me." A refining master and an inscription master were basically the same, both of them needed accurate and precise control of soul force. Sun Dong was a medium 5th grade soul talent and had also cultivated a soul law formula since he was a child in order to refine and build up his soul force. The power of his soul force could be imagined. Haha, I'm really looking forwards to this. Although Sun Dong isn't too strong, he just happens to be someone that is able to counter Lin Ming. Soul attacks shouldn't work against him. I wonder what other methods Lin Ming still has. Hehe, it's time that this Lin Ming will taste the suffering of defeat. I can't wait to see his winning streak ended. Lin Ming had swept away and defeated many masters of the 7 Profound Valleys. Since there were many total faction disciples in the audience, they naturally hoped that Lin Ming would lose a match. They were simply jealous of someone that could remain undefeated in the group stages. Not to mention, this young upstart youth actually came from the 36 countries. This was just like a poor boy that had climbed on a royal's head. This made people feel unhappy. Let me show you the secrets of our refiner faction. Stable tripod universe. Sun Dong gave a loud shout and the small black furnace above his head began to spin around in the wind. In a blink of an eye it had instantly enlarged by several feet. After true essence was poured into the furnace, it simply had an unimaginable force. It could even shatter a small hill or mountain top. Lin Ming didn't bother paying attention to whatever it was that Sun Dong was doing. Instead, his eyes flashed with a black light, the samsara martial intent surged outwards. Peng! Sun Dong paled as if he had been struck hard. Because the 3 feet large furnace in the air had lost the support of soul force and true essence, it pounded into the ground and broke apart the tiles. Damn, how could this happen? My soul force is so strong, how was he able to injure me? Sun Dong thought as he gasped for breath, a hand held up against his face to support himself. Furnace shattering 10,000 void. Sun Dong's eyes flashed, and the black furnace began to wildly spin around again. This time, it had only flown a few feet when it suddenly crashed into the floor. Lin Ming's eyes flashed with a black light again. Sun Dong's body shook once more, then his eyes lost all focus and he slumped onto the ground. Lin Ming, victory. After the referee's announcement, the entire audience was stunned silent. Even the refiner faction's Sun Dong had been defeated. Not only that, but he had been defeated so easily. How could this be? Wang Mu's defeat was surprising to some, but this was still an acceptable outcome. The reasoning for this was that Lin Ming's soul force was simply too monstrously abnormal, and was able to equal someone at the middle pulse condensation period. But Sun Dong was a refining master whose attacks used soul force. How could he also suffer a similar fate like Wang Mu? Just what sort of background did this Lin Ming fellow have? Many of the 7 Profound Valley disciples that were watching from the audience suddenly felt chills crawl down their spines. Lin Ming had used his soul force to defeat opponents one after another. Regardless of an opponent's cultivation or how their soul force was, the matches had been resolved within the space of a few breaths. Lin Ming's soul force attacks gave those watching a completely mystical and unfathomable feeling. The truth was, although Lin Ming's samsara martial intent was approximately a soul attack, it wasn't only a soul attack. The samsara martial intent that he'd been born out of the will within one's heart was in itself an attack on a martial artist's heart of martial arts. If one didn't have a firm and steady heart of martial arts, then it would be very simple for them to become lost in the 100 samsaras. Even though a martial artist could have a powerful soul force, that didn't imply that their heart was firm. Therefore, one wouldn't be able to ignore the samsara martial intent attack just by virtue of a strong soul force. The samsara martial intent could only be seen by those it was used against. Only those people would be able to see the mysterious secrets within. Others would find it too difficult to understand the profound secrets and truths hidden within. As for those who had been overwhelmed by the countless visions and images, they had quickly lost consciousness after. In the end, it was difficult to say just what sort of attacks had been used. However, at this time at the Grand Hall, Mu Qinghong noticed that there was something peculiar about Lin Ming's soul attack. As for what it was, she would only ever be able to judge it if she personally experienced an attack. This youth is becoming more and more interesting. Maybe Chen Yu's talk wasn't so exaggerated as I thought. The corners of Mu Qinghong's lips curved up. She was glad that she hadn't made this trip in vain. The group stages were tepid, it was quite boring. There simply weren't any showdowns between the true heavyweights. In half the matches, the result had been decided just by one's cultivation. Finally, Ling Sen and Bai Tinghua's match was about to happen. It attracted the attention of many people. Ling Sen, 21 years old, cultivation of early bone forging. Bai Tinghua, 19 years old, cultivation of late pulse condensation. From the very start of the match, Ling Sen activated his slaughter domain. He knew quite well that Bai Tinghua would be the strongest opponent that he had faced so far. Fu. Bai Tinghua felt a bit dizzy as the scenery around him changed. In the next moment, he had been transported to a blood hell. He saw the endless grey rocks, as well as the countless devils that were climbing out of the 9th layer of the abyss. Bai Tinghua wickedly smiled. Illusion. I am from the Mirage faction. Bai Tinghua's mouth arced in a smile. Bai Tinghua pinched his hands, and suddenly an endless pillar of fire descended from the heavens. With the roaring combustion sound of the flames, these devils had been turned into ashes. The flame kept growing larger and hotter. Suddenly, the flame began to break the rocks and even set the sky ablaze. This inferno was an illusion formed by Bai Tinghua. In the illusionary world, Bai Tinghua was God. Peng. The slaughter domain was shattered. Lin Sen's face whitened to the color of bone. Bai Tinghua smiled as he looked down on Ling Sen. You are not my match. Thousand-hand bright Buddha. Bai Tinghua's palm struck out. Soon, countless images of Bai Tinghua's hand began to form a series of illusory phantoms. Bai Tinghua's phantom palms increased until they began to blot out the entire sky. Ling Sen gave a loud shout and took out his heavy sword. His body's true essence revolved the utter limit, and he cut down with his sword in a counter-attack. Peng! The sword wind was shattered. The bricks underneath Ling Sen's foot had been turned into stone powder. With a stuffy snort, he knelt down as he was. The true essence surrounding his body had been scattered, and he had received a heavy wound. Bai Tinghua, victory. The referee that announced his also felt that there wasn't anything unusual about this match. The cultivation of the two had simply been too different. If Ling Sen had been able to win, then that would be the most shocking event in the entire 7 Profound Valleys. Ling Sen had completely lost. Not only that, but he didn't even have the qualifications to force Bai Tinghua to use his true ability. After Ling Sen and Bai Tinghua's match was over, there were very few matches remaining that were worth paying attention to. Most of Lin Ming's matches had forfeited. If it continued like this, he would easily pass the group stages. Bai Tinghua and Jiang Lanjian had qualified with the same undefeated score. Qin Xingxuan was off by 2 wins. Her journey in this martial meeting was halted in the group stages. Ling Sen won 12 and lost 3. His results in Group 6 qualified him to cross into the next stages. Although this result was ordinary, it was quite good if compared to Ling Sen's low early bone forging cultivation. It was only because Ling Sen was 21 and had missed the best times of his youth to cultivate. His cultivation speed had always been his weakness. It was the limiter that prevented Ling Sen from entering into the top tier of talents. It's sunset. The victory report should be arriving any moment now. In the Sky Fortune Kingdom, the 7 Profound Valleys sound transmission array had already opened. There were 36 pure true essence stones splendidly placed on the array disk. At this time, many important people had arrived around the sound transmission array. There were several 7 Profound Martial House elders, Ta Ku, and other important disciples of the 7 Profound Martial House, and also several nobles of Sky Fortune Kingdom. Today was the day that the group matches were finished, so they were waiting for the victory report to arrive. Chapter 248 The second round begins. Chapter 248 The second round begins. Chapter 248 The second round begins. The snow fluttered in the falling light and the icy wind was chilling to the bone. Crown Prince Yang Lin had a thick golden-purple cloak draped over his body. He was waiting patiently on a thick wooden chair. The truth was that Yang Lin didn't have to stay here to listen to the message as it came. As long as the Total Faction Martial Meeting victory report arrived, thousands of sound-transmitting talismans would instantly light up and the report would be sent to important figures of all the great power players. Tomorrow, the national newspaper of Sky Fortune City would publish the results. The reason that Yang Lin personally insisted on waiting here was besides Qin Zia, there was no one else that was more concerned about Lin Ming's results than him. His destiny had already been tightly bound together with Lin Ming. Now that Ouyang Dehua was dead, as long as Lin Ming's influence increased just a little bit, his chances of winning the throne were that much higher. Outside the temple, there were many disciples of the 7 Profound Martial House waiting, many of them being the new disciples that had entered the 7 Profound Martial House through the entrance exam. The words that Instructor Hong Shi had said to them had left a very deep and shocking impression on their young minds, and they had braved the chilling cold to stand here because they believed that they would be able to witness a historic moment. The results from the Total Faction Martial Meeting wasn't only related to the glory of Sky Fortune Kingdom's Martial House, it also had a very important political significance and it represented the power of the country's martial artists. The dazzling successes of the young martial artists was a manifestation of the nation's strength. If they could reach a result that was up to the standards of the 7 Profound Valleys, the 7 Profound Valleys would also increase the resources allotted to Sky Fortune Kingdom. Although the 7 Profound Valleys was a blood-sucking vampire, they weren't completely merciless or without foresight. If a country could prove its value, then the 7 Profound Valleys would be willing to help elevate it. For instance, Huoluo Nation, Grace Venerate Nation, and some of the 16 martial cultivation families like the Zhong family were like this. In summary, the 7 Profound Valleys would use their resources in a way to maximize efficiency. It would not waste any resources on the weak and the wasted. In the sunset of early winter, the clouds were thick in the sky, and the dark night fell sooner. There were some maids near the altar that had lit candle lamps under the shade. In such cold weather, these maids that had no martial cultivation could not stay warm, no matter how much they wore. Even though there was shelter, the light was erratic and the snow sporadically fell, turning into small droplets of water that wet the lamp paper. Just when everyone was beginning to become anxious, the sound transmission array suddenly activated, and the 36 true essence stones began to light up one at a time. Yang Lin immediately stood up, looking unblinkingly towards the sound transmission array, his ears at full attention. A sound transmission array was different from a sound transmission talisman. Everyone around it would be able to hear the message. As the light of the transmission array began to reach a peak, the sound of Qin Zia's voice was emitted. Qin Xingxuan was off by 2 necessary wins. She can go no further in the group stages. Ling Sen won 12 and lost 3. His results in Group 6 qualify him to take part in the next stages. He has entered the top 100. Lin Ming, all matches were complete victories. He is first in the qualifying group and he has entered the top 100. Even though Qin Zia was usually tranquil, his voice still trembled as he said Lin Ming's results. All matches were complete victories. This was a glory that had never happened ever since Sky Fortune Kingdom was founded. For the countries ranked in the middle of the 36 countries, it was already a cause worth rejoicing if they had a talent that could pass the Mountain Gate trial every 2 or 3 total faction martial meetings. A local talent of Sky Fortune Kingdom hadn't passed the Mountain Gate trial in the last 15 years, but now, the 3 disciples, Lin Ming, Ling Sen, and Qin Xingxuan, had all crossed the Mountain Gate trial. Not only that, but Lin Ming and Ling Sen had both passed the first group stage. What was even more riveting was that Lin Ming had passed by having a complete victory. What kind of glory was this? Even Huoluo Nation had never achieved something like this. All matches, complete victory? If it really is a complete victory, then Lin Ming has just created a Sky Fortune Kingdom record. The Heavenly Abode elder Sun Siphon gleefully laughed. He was probably the elder in the 7 profound martial house that had the best relations with Lin Ming. He had supported the newbie Lin Ming during the time of the entrance examination when he had achieved first place. Now, Sun Siphon believed that this was the wisest decision he had made in his entire life. Compared to the laughing Sun Siphon, Yang Lin sank back into his chair. His hands were trembling as they gripped the armrest. This revealed his inner excitement and roiling emotions. Yang Lin was absolutely the most overjoyed person here. Someone like Lin Ming with such a strong and pure heart of martial arts would never be ungrateful and renege on a promise that he had made. As long as there wasn't an accident, Yang Lin would be able to smoothly inherit the throne. Yang Lin had already been waiting too long for this day. Although everybody looked up to him as the crown prince and they were in awe of what a great position he had, no one actually understood the pain, doubt, and fear that pierced Yang Lin's deepest feelings. Once the struggle for the throne began, there was no turning back. Once he walked down that harsh path, there was no redemption if he fell. Even his own mother's and sister's life were tied together with his. It was as if he were walking on a tightrope every day and living in abject fear of the future's possibilities. But now that he finally saw the dawning sun, how could he not be excited? The new 7 profound martial house disciples also cheered as they heard the news. They had braved this cold wind in order to stand here because they were part of the Lin maniacs that had taken Lin Ming as their idol. To them, they would never envy Lin Ming's glory, they would only admire and respect him. Who? Several dozens of sound-transmitting talismans simultaneously lit up at once, rapidly circulating the joyous news. Because of the distances, series of sound-transmitting talismans were used. These ordinary sound-transmitting talismans could only work in a 100-mile range. A large sect could use high-grade sound-transmitting talismans that could send messages tens of thousands of miles, but Sky Fortune Kingdom naturally wouldn't have this sort of sound-transmitting talisman. As one batch of sound-transmitting talismans burned out, the second batch was lit. In the dark night, the dancing flames of the sound-transmitting talismans became increasingly brilliant and gorgeous. Yang Lin took a deep breath. Watching these burning flames, he suddenly thought that this sight was extremely beautiful. Next day, profound sky mountains. It was a new day and a new martial stage. There were less matches today, but the matches were much more intense. The matches were still arranged without drawing lots. The referee was the one who organized the brackets. This was to arrange the various participants based on their strength, and so that the extremely formidable seeded participants wouldn't meet ahead of time. Lin Ming had been placed in the 7th group, and this group also had 10 people. Within these 10 was actually a direct disciple of the Array faction, Fang Qi. In addition, there was also the Mirage factions by Tinghua. In this group of 10, every disciple had to fight in 8 matches. There would only be one person they wouldn't battle. The match between Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua was said to be inevitable. Even though two strong participants like Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua would meet, this would be replicated across many martial stages. Out of each group, the participants would be divided again based on their final result. The top 3 would enter the first tier, the next 3 would enter the second tier, and the remaining 4 would enter the third tier. With 10 groups, there would be a total of 30 people in the first tier. Although these 30 people weren't considered to be the top 30, there wouldn't be much difference. When the time came for the round-robin tournament, the final result would be decided by points. In that case, the first-place participant in the first tier would become the champion of the total faction martial meeting. The second tier would also carry out a round-robin tournament. The top 10 ranked of the second tier would earn the qualifications to challenge the rankings of the first-tier disciples. If they won, they might be able to advance into the top 30. But it would basically be impossible for them to reach the top 20. The third tier was the same except they could earn the qualifications to compare to the second tier. In short, this current group stage was extremely critical. It would directly decide the final result of a contestant. Whether a carpfish could become a dragon would all be decided here. If one wanted to struggle for the top 20, they would have to at least reach the first tier. This time, unless one was a talent on par with a direct disciple, there was no way that they would be able to hide the extent of their strength. The first tier of each group only had 3 people. After deducting a spot for the seeded player, there were in fact only 2 spots that the disciples could struggle for. With 9 people competing for 2 spots, and not only that, but with these 9 disciples being top-tier geniuses that had passed through layers and layers of screening, the intensity of the competition could be imagined. First match. Jing Chanyu against Zi Ling. With the referee's announcement, a woman activated her movement technique and jumped onto the stage, her clothes fluttering in the wind just like a heavenly fairy maiden that was riding the surging waves. The woman's face was covered with a thin light gauze veil, but it was still possible to faintly make out the image of her face. Although she wasn't considered to be a heavenly beauty, there was actually something mysterious about her that was extremely fascinating. Qin Xingxuan was slightly stunned. She said to Lin Ming in a low voice, "That's Jing Chanyu from Grace Venerate Nation. She's the sister of the brother-sister pair from Hualuo Nation. The two of them are called the Jingchan Duo, and they are more famous than you right now." Grace Veneration Nation was an extremely mysterious country. It wouldn't be wrong to say that they were the strongest country within the 36 countries. The whole population of Grace Venerate Nation believed in a goddess named Chan. In Grace Venerate Nation, the theocracy was above the imperial throne. If the emperor ascended the throne, he also needed to be crowned by the leader of their church. Lin Ming guessed that this goddess named Chan had a very high possibility of being someone like the Southern Wilderness's sorcerer. She might have been a supreme being that had appeared in ancient times and left behind some inheritances and legacies after flying towards the realm of the gods. With her good fortunes and lucks that she left behind, this would have been the reason for the power of Grace Venerate Nation. The Jingchan Duo's compensation rate for becoming the top champions of the 36 countries was 1:2. As for Lin Ming, his odds had been 1:6. After he handily defeated the refiner faction's Sun Dong, his compensation rate had dropped to 1:3. Although his odds were good, he was still overshadowed by the Jingchan Duo. This caused Lin Ming to have a wondering curiosity about these twins. What was exactly so great about them? Seeing Jing Chanyu step on stage, the audience was stirred into a furor. Especially the male disciples, their interest towards Jing Chanyu far surpassed everyone else. The obsessive light from their eyes was nearly visible. "I heard that she is only 18 years old and this is her first time participating in the Total Faction marital meeting. I wonder what rank she'll reach in her first time. She might be the next Zhong Yangzhao. Up until now there hasn't been an opponent that has disturbed her calm, no one has even managed to take her veil off, it really is indescribable. Such a beautiful girl, it's a pity she's wearing a veil." As the people hollered in excitement, all of their eyes were focuses in Jing Chanyu. Suddenly, the referee announced, "Match, start." Everyone hesitated. Millimeter. An opponent hadn't appeared on stage yet. Where was Ziling? How come there's only Jing Chanyu on stage? Qin Xingxuan asked, also puzzled. She looked at the martial stage in confusion. Lin Ming smiled at her and said, Ziling is already on stage. It's just that she went on earlier and she's hiding in distorted light so she can't be seen so easily. What? How is that possible? Qin Xingxuan was shocked. Isn't this just invisibility? The path of martial arts truly diverged and converged into endless profound paths. Any strange and wonderful phenomenon could occur. At this moment, an indifferent voice could be heard from behind them. Ziling is a talented disciple of the Mirage faction. She is able to manipulate light to deceive the eye. During the last total faction martial meeting, she attained a 56th ranking. Now after 3 years, it looks quite promising that she'll reach the top 30. Chapter 249 Jingchan Duo. Chapter 249 Jingchan Duo. Chapter 249 Jingchan Duo. Lin Ming turned around to see that the speaker was actually Jiang Lanjian. Although Lin Ming didn't really know him, he could tell that Jiang Lanjian was someone with a very broad and accurate sense of judgment. He wouldn't easily label someone as a talent. Lin Ming laughed and smiled as he spoke. Interesting. If the first group stage was a husband and wife fighting, then this second stage is truly a gathering of masters. Jiang Lanjian looked at Lin Ming in surprise and replied, Your group is quite strong, but it seems that you're confident in yourself. In the 7th group, there was Fang Qi, Bai Tinghua, Jing Chanyu, and Ziling. With Lin Ming, that was 5 altogether. These 5 people were competing for 3 spots. However, Fang Qi's place could already be considered as guaranteed. Jiang Lanjian thought that Lin Ming would be extremely solemn facing these experts, but he hadn't expected Lin Ming to be merrily laughing. Either Lin Ming had entirely given up on entering the first tier, or he had extreme confidence in his own power. As for Jiang Lanjian, he thought that Lin Ming was part of the latter. Who do you think will win, Jing Chanyu or Ziling? Lin Ming asked Jiang Lanjian. Jiang Lanjian shook his head. They still haven't revealed their true strength. Not only that, but since they both reached this stage by having complete victories, I don't know what to expect. There were 4 or 5 people in each group that had achieved complete victory in the last stage. In the 7th group there were 5. These 5 were Lin Ming, Fang Qi, Bai Tinghua, Jing Chanyu, and Ziling. However, after this group stage, at most, there could only be 2 participants who would possibly remain undefeated. As the 2 boys spoke, the battle on the martial stage had already begun. This was an extremely strange fight. From the very beginning, the audience hadn't been able to see where Ziling was. They only saw lights flashing just like celestial beauties that were scattering flowers, blinding their eyes. However, Lin Ming was able to rely on his powerful perception in order to clearly see what was happening on the martial field. Ziling waved her arms to create 6 sharp-bladed edges. These edges seemed gentle as they emitted light, but each one was able to instantly destroy an early pulse condensation martial artists. Because the speed was too fast, the light beams drew a series of rainbows in the air as they let out sharp whistles that made the scalp tingle. Manipulating the power of light is truly an incomparably mysterious and amazing ability. Lin Ming felt that although those light blades were formed of true essence, they also contained a hint of light essence. This was a mystical power that was more elusive than the 7 natural heaven and earth origin energies of metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, and thunder. In an instant, 36 light blades hovered in the sky. These light blades howled in the air as they danced around, but they still hadn't attacked Jing Chanyu. Suddenly, Ziling clasped her hands together and shouted out, 36 light blade extreme execution. With this cry, the 36 light blades all focused in one direction and soared towards Jing Chanyu. Facing this light blade attack that attacked from every dead angle, Jing Chanyu hadn't even lifted her hands. Instead, her hands lay flat, and a soft light emanated outwards from her chest, forming a thick light cover that all over her just like an eggshell. Kai 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 kai. The blades of light struck against the thick barrier and encountered a massive resistance, instantly coming to a near halt. Meanwhile, the blades of light also caused the eggshell to rapidly melt away. Halcyon reflection 1000 shaded hands. Jing Chanyu turned over both her hands, and a series of shadows condensed from her fingers and flew into the air, covering the sky. Bang! Ziling, who had been hiding in the distorted light, suddenly gave a stuffy cough and was directly forced out into the open by Jing Chanyu's strike. Ziling was holding a sword of blazing light in her hand, an expression of shock twisting her features. Be defeated. Jing Chanyu parted her delicate rose-red lips and began to him in a low voice. A massive, glowing, golden hand slowly manifested in front of her. Halcyon reflection, great wisdom palm, bang! A huge golden palm imprinted onto Ziling's body. The sword of light in Ziling's hand broke apart, and she let out a spray of blood before being sent flying backwards, landing onto the safety net outside the stage. Jing Chanyu, victory. With the announcement of the referee, the audience hadn't even had time to react. From the beginning of the match until the end, only a short period of 10 breaths had passed. Jing Chanyu had only used 3 moves. 1 defensive, and 2 offensive. After 3 moves, Ziling had been defeated. However, Jing Chanyu hadn't even moved a single step. The veil that lightly hung on her face hadn't even been blown by the breeze. From start to finish, Jing Chanyu had been incomparably tranquil. Ziling wasn't a useless nobody. When she was young, she had already been chosen as a core disciple of the Mirage faction. Her talent was simply amazing, and at the last total faction martial meeting she had reached rank 56. During this martial meeting, she had achieved complete victory within the first group stage, and would have easily strode into the top 30. But now, she had actually lost to Jing Chanyu, and in only 3 moves. This Jing Chanyu was simply too strong. Jiang Lanjian's eyebrows ticked up. Between Jing Chanyu and Ziling, he hadn't really thought either side had an advantage. But to his surprise, Jing Chanyu won by a landslide. This was enough to prove that she had the ability to reach the top 20 rankings. If she could really reach the top 20, then she was an existence to be considered. As far as Jiang Lanjian knew, Jing Chanyu wasn't too old. 3 years later she could return to the next total faction martial meeting. At that time, her limelight might even be greater than this martial meeting's Zhongyangjiao. If any one of the 36 countries' disciples could break into the top 10, that was sufficient enough to be recorded in the annals of the 7 Profound Valleys history. That would simply be an extraordinary result. Also, Jing Chanyu had an older twin brother, Jing Chansha. His strength shouldn't be any weaker than Jing Chanyu. The tiny Grace Venerate nation had actually produced 2 talents that were capable of reaching the top 10 rankings in the total faction martial meeting within the next 3 years. This was unprecedented in the last 100 years. Jiang Lanjian couldn't help glance at Lin Ming and was surprised that Lin Ming was still looking on with bored indifference. Although he may have been surprised by Jing Chanyu's strength, he obviously wasn't too worried for himself. This fellow was simply too confident. The quality of talents during this year's total faction martial meeting was exceedingly promising. The 36 countries and 16 martial families had managed to produce Zhong Yangjiao, the Jingchan duo, and Lin Ming, 4 peerless talents. Not only that, but the Jingchan duo and Lin Ming were still young. They would have a tremendous amount of growing they could do in the next 3 years. With this thought, Jiang Lanjian's eyes suddenly jumped up. Lin Ming looked like he was 16 or 17, but just how old was he? Although there was only a 1-year difference between 16 and 17 years of age, this actually created an enormous difference in a martial artist's cultivation. Normally, a child raised in a large sect would start practicing martial arts as soon as they could walk. During their entire childhood, they would practice martial arts in order to lay a solid foundation for their future achievements. They would build up their body with rare and precious medicines, but they wouldn't cultivate true essence yet. In order to cultivate true essence, one needed the body to grow. Starting at 12 years of age, a martial artist child would begin to cultivate body transformations 6 stages such as strength training, flesh training, and viscera training. A 16-year-old would have cultivated for 4 years, whereas a 17-year-old would have cultivated for 5. This difference was neither small nor meaningless. If Lin Ming was 17 years old, then he could be considered a first-grade talent. If he was 16 years old, then he would be considered as an extreme talent that wouldn't be inferior to any of the 7 factions' direct disciples by much. Second match, Fang Qi to Zhu Yang. As Lin Ming heard Fang Qi's name, he couldn't help but pay a little attention. The 7 Profound Valley's 7 factions were respectively the Sword faction, Array faction, Puppet faction, Zither faction, Acacia faction, Refiner faction, and Mirage faction. Of these, the Sword faction was the one whose disciples had the strongest attack power. However, that didn't mean that the disciples of the Sword faction were the most powerful. Each of the other 6 had their own unique skills and abilities. For instance, the Puppet faction, Mirage faction, and Array faction had extremely peculiar defensive and offensive skills. They could use a nearly endless variety of outlandish and absolutely bizarre moves. Although they might not be as strong as the Sword faction, they were actually much more difficult to deal with than the Sword faction. To Lin Ming, out of these 7 factions, he was most interested in the Array faction. When he had obtained the second memory fragment from the Supreme Elder, he had also obtained that Elder's memories as an Array Master. Unfortunately, Lin Ming's cultivation was simply too low to make use of any of those Array Master's memories, thus, he was unable to practice it. Lin Ming had thought that he would need to be at least at the Xiantian realm of cultivation to create the large-scale array formations in those memories. However, the 7 Profound Valleys Array faction had taught him a very good lesson. The small Thunderbolt Devilfire bead had actually saved Lin Ming's life. Lin Ming had never dreamt of sealing a tiny array formation configuration within a tiny bead. Lin Ming had even considered that if he were to enter into the 7 Profound Valleys total faction later, wouldn't it be best to join the Array faction? From the start of the match, Zhu Yang had used a defensive martial skill in order to cover his body with layer upon layer of protective true essence. However, nobody laughed at him for being cowardly. In fact, it was already a kind of courage to have the guts to face a direct disciple of the 7 factions. Zhu Yang wasn't some worthless disciple. During the last total faction martial meeting, he had been ranked 70. Throughout the group matches, he had only dropped 1 fight. Although it wasn't very hopeful for him to enter into the first tier, it would be simple for him to enter into the second tier. Scarlet Blaze Flame. After he had cloaked himself in his ultimate protection, Zhu Yang instantly let loose his do-or-die finishing blow. He was a disciple of the Refiner faction and in his body was a hollow flame essence. He had poured the entirety of his true essence into this hollow flame, and a lifelike fiery dragon surged out from his body. The martial stage was surrounded by a fantasy array formation so that the audience outside couldn't feel the burning heat of that fiery dragon. Still, from the way that light twisted around the flame dragon, one could imagine just how hot it was. This sort of fiery dragon was enough to turn an entire lake into steam. If it struck a martial artist, even a middle pulse condensation period master would be charred. But Fang Qi only lifted his right hand and drew a golden array symbol in the air. Then, the impossible occurred. The fiery dragon crashed into the golden symbol and disappeared inside without a trace left. It was as if that golden symbol was connected to a different space and shifted the fiery dragon to a completely unknown land. Seeing such a bizarre scene, Zhu Yang only let out a depressed sigh and uttered, "I admit defeat." The Scarlet Blaze Flame was his strongest skill, but in front of someone like Fang Qi, not even a tiny spark had struck his robes. Instead, his flame attack had simply disappeared into nothingness. This caused Zhu Yang to feel extremely inadequate and useless. The disparity between them was just too great, enough that he wasn't even able to imagine how much it was. Fang Qi, victory. This was already expected. The audience only murmured about how strong a direct disciple was and waited for the next match. Lin Ming was actually thinking back on that symbol. How could such a small symbol swallow the scarlet flames that Zhu Yang had forced out with all his strength? He felt that there was an enormous difference between the array formation system in the realm of the gods and the array formation system in the 7 Profound Valleys Array faction. It could even be said that they were 2 completely different set of skills. To Lin Ming, it seemed like the array faction's array formation system could play a much bigger role for the current him. At this moment, the voice of the referee interrupted Lin Ming's thoughts. Third match, Lin Ming against Bai Tinghua. Lin Ming raised his head and saw that Bai Tinghua was looking at him with a bright smile plastered across his face. Chapter 250 Lin Ming vs Bai Tinghua. Chapter 250 Lin Ming vs Bai Tinghua. Chapter 250 Lin Ming vs Bai Tinghua. The match of Lin Ming against Bai Tinghua was considered a fight between two heavyweights. It also meant that there would be one less contestant with an undefeated string of complete victories. This match had aroused a tremendous interest amongst almost everyone. This wasn't just because Lin Ming was strong, but also because this match was directly related to who the strongest amongst the disciples from the 36 countries was. After Jing Chanyu defeated Zi Ling, she had seized the number one position among the disciples of the 36 countries, and was currently the one with the best betting odds to win at a rate of 1:1. As for her big brother Jing Chansha, his odds of becoming the 36 countries champion was 1:3. This had caused those that didn't bet on the Jing-Chan duo to feel great regret, but those that did were all smiles. It was almost impossible to make any money on a 1:1 compensation rate. Still, even if they couldn't, many people still happily bet on Jing Chanyu. As for Lin Ming, his odds rose back to 1:6. Although he was the third highest possible candidate to win the 36 countries championship, his odds of winning were still far compared to the Jing-Chan duo. This match between Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua was very important. It would determine, to a great extent, just who the title of number one amongst the 36 countries rightfully belonged to. Without a doubt, Bai Tinghua's strength far surpassed that of Zi Ling. As for who was stronger between Bai Tinghua and Jing Chanyu, most people thought that Jing Chanyu was. If Lin Ming couldn't defeat Bai Tinghua, then he would have lost all qualifications to become the champion of the 36 countries. However, Lin Ming's cultivation was only at the peak of bone forging. As for Bai Tinghua's cultivation, he was actually at the late pulse condensation period. The difference was almost an entire realm. How could Lin Ming possibly win? Let alone the audience who didn't believe Lin Ming could win, not even Qin Xingxuan, who normally had unshakable faith in Lin Ming, was sure. Lin Ming, I've been waiting for this match for a very, very long time. It's a pity that I happened to miss you in the first group stage. Bai Tinghua was a bit on the feminine side, so when he smiled it was just as if a dainty daisy was blooming. He narrowed his eyes as he glanced at Qin Xingxuan, who was waiting for Lin Ming by the side of the martial stage. He said, "Your young lady friend is probably hoping very much for you to win. I'd be happy to let her feel disappointment. I also think it was a pity that I missed you during the group stage. As for my friend, rest assured, she will not be disappointed." Lin Ming knew that he absolutely could win against Bai Tinghua. The only question was whether he could do so while only relying on his samsara martial intent. With regards to his samsara martial intent attack, Lin Ming didn't have full confidence. As the audience heard this exchange of words, they were left speechless. This Lin Ming was really overly confident in himself. Bai Tinghua was one of the top 3 ranked core disciple of the Mirage faction. His cultivation was at the late pulse condensation period, but in terms of true combat ability, he could compare to a half-step Hutian realm master. During this total faction martial meeting, Bai Tinghua had a very high chance of reaching the top 20 rankings. As for Lin Ming, who only used bizarre soul attacks, with Fang Qi, Jing Chanyu, and Bai Tinghua still blocking his way, none was in favor of him reaching the first tier. Bai Tinghua laughed and said, "You're quite confident. How unfortunate. Let me tell you this, I also know soul attacks. I wonder, are your soul attacks weaker or stronger than mine? Originally, I wasn't sure. But looking at the sorry state you're in, I think my chances might have just increased." Humph. What ridiculous nonsense. Bai Tinghua gave a cold snort and suddenly the surrounding scene immediately changed. The audience disappeared, the sky disappeared, the ground disappeared, and Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua suddenly both stood in an endless wilderness, a prairie that extended to the ends of the earth. The ground underneath their feet was covered in soft grass, small fresh flowers and fragrant plants bloomed. "This is my Mirage faction's dreamland combined with my soul attack. I'd like to see just how you'll block this." An illusion attack was also a kind of soul attack. It could invisibly kill someone. An illusionist could create his own separate dreamland. In this dreamland, the illusionist was a godlike existence. In this dreamland, he could create anything, find out anything, and kill off anyone he wished with just a thought. While trapped within a dreamland, if a martial artist believed he was dead, then he would really die in reality. An illusion was truly capable of killing a person. Ordinary abilities killed a person by destroying their body, but an illusion attack was able to destroy the human soul. Die! Bai Tinghua gave a loud shout, and behind him appeared a beautiful Naga. This Naga had the upper body of an exquisitely heavenly beauty, naked and almost perfect in proportions, but her lower body was that of a massive python. Dying in the belly of this beautiful snake woman is also your luck. Go, eat him. With a thought from Bai Tinghua, the Naga's mouth curved up in a charming smile. Suddenly, the Naga dropped to the ground, flattening her body to the floor and firing towards Lin Ming like an arrow. Rah! The beautiful Naga uttered a low roar. Suddenly her cherry-red lips opened, and revealed rows upon rows of sharpened teeth that extended from ear to ear. In that instant, her beautiful face became horrifyingly ferocious. A dreamland battle? A battle of souls within this dreamland was just to Lin Ming's liking. Recently he had been trying to come to a deeper understanding of his samsara martial intent. Since he had such a great opportunity to fight like this, he certainly wouldn't miss it. Lin Ming shut his eyes and then opened them. In that moment, his eyes had lost their pupils, becoming nothing but a swirling black vortex. As the samsara martial intent activated, a titanic black storm appeared spanning the entire dreamland, a massive vortex in the midst, swallowing all. The grass and flowers were torn to shreds and trees were uprooted. Dirt and rocks twisted into the air, as everything began to rise towards that swirling vortex. The beautiful Naga was also thrown into the roiling storm. With a pitiful scream, she was torn into pieces. Millimeter? Your eyes. Bai Tinghua had just reacted when he felt his mind tremble. Countless phantoms and images rushed into his brain, flooding his thoughts as his spiritual sea almost collapsed. Bang! The endless prairie dreamland collapsed, turning into nothingness under the power of the limitless vortex. In its place, a vast black space formed. Countless brilliant stars shined like glittering diamonds overhead, while the ground was nothing but barren black rock. Die! Lin Ming's eyes flashed, and a black vortex fell upon Bai Tinghua, completely shredding him to bit. However, the destroyed body of Bai Tinghua turned into millions of black butterflies that flew into the wind, scattering into all directions. Millimeter? Lin Ming felt his heart go cold. This Bai Tinghua was really hard to deal with. The swarm of millions upon millions of black butterflies soared into the air, covering the entire sky. After a few moments, they all rushed towards Lin Ming, morphing into hawks as they zoomed down, their claws glinting with cold light. Pa 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 pa. The millions of hawks crashed into Lin Ming, submerging into his body as if they were made of nothing but thoughts and headed straight towards his spiritual sea. At this time, Lin Ming's spiritual sea was obscured by countless spirit hawks. Get out! Lin Ming's eyes flashed with a purple thunder. Suddenly, massive arcs of purple lightning exploded from within Lin Ming's spiritual sea. A gargantuan purple thunder flood dragon threaded between clouds, thunder billowing like a winter storm. Bolts of thunder the width of pillars covered the entire sea, and the hawks that were struck by this thunder could only let out unceasing pitiful screeches as they were instantly reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye, their black feathers littering the skies. The power of thunder was the element that most restrained ghosts and illusions. This make-believe attack simply could not injure Lin Ming's spiritual sea at all. Millimeter? His entire spiritual sea is covered in purple thunder. Bai Tinghua was shocked beyond imagination. This was simply a kind of absolute soul defense. Only if the cultivation difference was too high would he be able to do anything, otherwise no one would be able to use a soul attack to damage Lin Ming's spiritual sea. A thunder attribute martial artist was when the power of thunder flooded into their true essence. If their power of thunder and their true essence could achieve a 60% fusion rate, this was already very good. It would be considered a fourth-grade thunder fusion, and had enormous significance towards a martial artist's combat potential. If one achieved 90% thunder fusion, that would be considered as a fifth-grade fusion, and could be considered a thunder attribute talent. If one achieved 100%, then that would be a superior fifth-grade thunder fusion. This person would simply be a monstrous genius. If one surpassed 100%, then not only would the power of thunder completely fuse into their true essence, but it would also enter into the martial artist's flesh and blood body, tempering his everything with thunder. Every gesture he made or step he took would flash with thunder. This was a sixth-grade fusion. But higher the degree of integration between the power of thunder and the body, the more perfect one's thunder fusion was. A superior sixth-grade fusion was the absolute limit that Bai Tinghua had ever known about. But he had never heard of the power of thunder being able to enter one's spiritual sea. This could only be achieved by an unsurpassed thunder fusion. How could he have achieved this point? Was it a fabled seventh-grade fusion? If it really was a seventh-grade fusion, then Lin Ming wouldn't even need to use a soul attack. He would only need to use the power of thunder to defeat him. Impossible. This was simply impossible. Either Bai Tinghua had misunderstood some point, or this little kid had used some sort of secret skill in order to accomplish this. Bai Tinghua consoled himself by repeating this. But an inevitable fear emerged from his heart. His main method of attack was to use illusions, yet with his opponent's spiritual sea like this, it could be said that Lin Ming was in an invincible position. A soul force duel was ever-changing and fluid. Once fear crept into one's mind, that was a fatal flaw. With Lin Ming's keen perception, he instantly caught on to that moment where an opening appeared in Bai Tinghua's spiritual sea. The samsara martial intent surged forth. Is there something wrong? I just came back from the toilet and those two fellows are still standing on stage without moving. Are they still going to fight or something? You idiot, the match had already begun. From then to now, those two are engaged in an illusionary battle. What? The surprised martial artists came from a martial cultivation family. He had absolutely no understanding at all of the Seven Profound Valleys illusion attacks. The Seven Profound Valleys Mirage faction has two offensive schools. One is mystic attacks and the other is illusions. Ziling was part of the mystic attack school, and this Bai Tinghua is from the illusion school. Within an illusion, one can instantly destroy the other's soul. However, Lin Ming also happens to use soul attacks, so that's why these two people are standing here. Don't just look at them and see they aren't moving. The truth is this type of battle is extremely risky. One wrong move and there's a chance you would become an idiot. What a shitty illusion duel. I can't even see anything. What's the point? After the martial artist from the martial family finished his criticism, he quickly walked his butt away. He had already been eliminated, and no matter how fierce the fighting was or who was winning or who was losing, he no longer cared. However, not everyone was like that. There were some that came to watch for fun. Amongst the audience, there were many that were disciples of the Mirage faction, and they were also experts from the school of illusionary attacks. They had specifically come to observe this ultimate soul force showdown. Although Bai Tinghua couldn't be considered the strongest disciple among the Mirage faction's younger generation, he was still skilled in illusions. It could be said that his attainments in dreamland attacks and soul attacks had reached the pinnacle of what was possible among the younger generation. Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua's soul force battle symbolized a fierce fight between Lin Ming and the Seven Profound Valleys' strongest soul attack junior. If Bai Tinghua lost, then no one in the entirety of the Seven Profound Valleys' younger generation could surpass Lin Ming in soul force accomplishments. This was a matter of pride for the Mirage faction. If they lost, they wouldn't even be able to lift their heads from the shame. For someone that had the best cultivation methods, the best masters, ate spiritual food since childhood and also had a large variety of resources, to lose to some random country bumpkin martial artist was truly unjustifiable. Chapter 251 One willing to fight, one willing to endure. Chapter 251 One willing to fight, one willing to endure. Chapter 251 One willing to fight, one willing to endure. In the endless illusionary dreamland, the samsara martial intent rolled out like a tide, frantically swelling as it rushed over Bai Tinghua. Because of that split second of fearful hesitation, a glimmer of a flaw was produced within Bai Tinghua's mind. Lin Ming seized this opportunity and struck back. Bang! Countless phantoms and images flowed into Bai Tinghua's mind, the endless lives of 100 samsaras drowning him like a chaotic whirlpool. A showdown between soul forces was constantly evolving. A dangerous move, a wrong move, and everything could be lost. Fortunately, Bai Tinghua was much more proficient than Lin Ming in terms of utilizing his soul force. Although that flaw in his mind had placed him in a passive situation of defending, his soul force defensive skills were able to barely hold off the attacks on his spiritual sea. The battle between the two became increasingly ruthless and savage. Lin Ming was relying on the purple flood dragon Divine Thunder in his spiritual sea to launch an all-out offensive. With the power of thunder to protect his spiritual sea, he was in a nearly impregnable position. As for Bai Tinghua, he was surrounded by danger on all sides. While Bai Tinghua had the cultivation methods of the Mirage faction, towards Lin Ming's samsara martial intent that he had comprehended in the Sorcerer Holy Land after experiencing 100 lives of samsara, they were on completely different levels in comparison. With Bai Tinghua's many years of cultivation and foundation within the Mirage faction accumulated together, he was barely able to endure this attack. With the dramatic and massive consumption of soul force, Bai Tinghua's true body that was still standing on stage immediately paled, without a single trace of red in his cheeks. This damn boy, his soul force was actually so strong. Bai Tinghua was a disciple of the Mirage faction, so he specialized in extremely precise use of soul force. But compared to Lin Ming, he was still inferior. It had to be known that Bai Tinghua's cultivation was almost an entire realm above Lin Ming's. Lucky for me, this boy has only a single way to attack, and a complete lack of soul force skills. Every time he attacks, he wastes too much. Bai Tinghua's thoughts raced. As he was resisting Lin Ming's attack, he was also thinking of possibilities to win. I can only defend and not attack. Although this Lin Ming has an extremely formidable soul force, he doesn't know any techniques to use with it. Every time he attacks me, he wastes a massive amount of soul force. Plus, since I am the one defending, I have to put in less effort to maintain this. His soul force consumption rate has to be at least 3 times my own. If this continues, he will definitely lose. As long as I can resist this round of continuous onslaught, my victory will be decided once he exhausts his soul force and can no longer maintain that purple lightning that covers his spiritual sea. Thinking this, Bai Tinghua's lips curved up in a devilish grin. In the end, this country bumpkin martial artist who came from a hick village could only rely on brute force and had no skills. He was doomed to lose by his own hand. Bai Tinghua had no way of knowing that this situation was exactly what Lin Ming was hoping for. Ever since Lin Ming had begun to use his samsara martial intent, he had been trying to further his comprehension of the samsara martial intent. It seemed as if his and Bai Tinghua's soul force strength were comparable. In addition, this Bai Tinghua was quite skilled in soul force techniques. To come across such a good opponent and moreover, in an endurance match, it could only be considered serendipity. To Lin Ming, Bai Tinghua was an exceptionally good grindstone to hone his abilities. The dreamland around them began to morph over and over again. From a prairie to blacklands. From blacklands to a prairie. From blacklands to a desert. From a desert to a bloody hell. Devils and dark spirits and noggers danced around Bai Tinghua, twisting around his body. These monsters were summoned by Bai Tinghua in order to protect his own spiritual sea. But in front of Lin Ming's never-ending brutal onslaught, everything was eventually torn apart by the swirling black vortex. As soon as the match began, it lasted for an incense stick, then 2 incense sticks, then 3 incense sticks. To half an hour. During this entire time, the 2 youths on the martial stage were still standing there, completely motionless. Bai Tinghua's face was already paler than bleached paper. With half an hour of intense soul force consumption, it wasn't something that the average person could endure. If it weren't for Bai Tinghua's high soul talent and thick foundation, he would have already fallen flat on the ground. How is this possible? Is this fellow really a human? Bai Tinghua couldn't imagine that his opponent could still persist until this moment, even though his soul force consumption rate was 3 times his own. If their positions were reversed, he would have already been done in. If I hold on for a bit longer, he won't be able to last much longer. I will be the one to finally win. Indeed, it was just as Bai Tinghua had said. Lin Ming truly couldn't persist much longer. Since he was on the offensive, his soul force consumption was tremendous. Lin Ming had been depending on the overbearing soul tactic that was left behind from the Supreme Elder from the realm of the gods. He had already accumulated a great deal of experience with this soul law formula by practicing his inscription technique. Although this soul law formula couldn't be considered the best within the realm of the gods, if placed in the Sky Spill continent, it was actually a top-quality technique among all top-quality techniques. However, even though he had this, he still was unable to withstand a soul force consumption that was 3 times Bai Tinghua's. His complexion wasn't much better than Bai Tinghua's. Lin Ming had clenched his teeth and persisted in his attacks until now because in this high-intensity soul force battle, he had obtained substantial benefits and had also increased his understanding of soul force techniques. Secondly, this was an unsurpassed great chance to further his comprehension of his samsara martial intent. If he missed this opportunity to fight against someone like Bai Tinghua whose soul force strength was close to his own and was also experienced, then it would be truly been a pity. In one breath, the two people had been standing on the martial stage for an entire half hour. The eyes of the audience had already glazed over in a dull and dazed look. The disciples of the Mirage faction were more fortunate. After all, they were already long used to this type of scene. Not only that, but the outcome of this match concerned the reputation of the Mirage faction. Naturally, they would be patiently watching. As for everyone else, they had already lost their patience. Some people had left this stage, and some people had just fallen asleep in their seats. Lin Ming probably can't persist much longer. In a duel between soul force and illusion techniques, it was absolutely difficult for outsiders to determine who had the upper hand in the duel. They simply weren't able to see what sorts of moves and abilities were used. They could only distinguish a general situation of the duel by looking at the external appearance of the participants. At this moment, Bai Tinghua looked a bit better than Lin Ming. Millimeter. It's just really inconceivable that a martial artist from the 36 countries could reach his point. To compel senior apprentice brother Bai into this appearance, this Lin Ming truly is a worthy talent. But this is as far as he goes. Finally, we barely managed to preserve the face of our Mirage faction. As the two Mirage faction disciples discussed the match, Lin Ming's body was shaking a bit. As for Bai Tinghua, although his face was as white as paper, he was barely able to stabilize himself from falling. He's going to win. At last. The Mirage faction disciples present sighed a breath of relief. Although this match had been won with difficulty and they had lost a great deal of face, in the end, for better or worse, they had still won. This soul force contest was completely a contest of endurance and willpower. After several dozen breaths of time, Lin Ming's soul force was reaching a state of near depletion. If he really ran out of soul force, then Lin Ming would lose his ability to control his true essence. At that time, he would surely lose. Looks like I have to stop here. Lin Ming thought it was a bit of a pity. He had wanted to persist a bit longer and gain some more insights. However, now it seemed that he could only end this soul force showdown and use his heavy profound soft spear to finish off Bai Tinghua and conclude this match. As he was considering withdrawing the leftovers of his depleted soul force, suddenly an incomparably pure and vibrant soul energy welled up from within Lin Ming's spiritual sea, making his soul shake with excitement. Millimeter? What is this? This pure soul force had suddenly swelled up from the underneath the depths of his spiritual sea. It was just as if it were buried there, and had been waiting for a chance to be unearthed. This is probably, I remember, this is the soul force that I absorbed from hungry ghosts in the Sorcerer Pagoda. Lin Ming suddenly realized what was happening. Back when he had entered the life and death smelting trial of the Sorcerer Pagoda, he had passed all 7 trials in a single go. The first trial had been a hellish world that was able to enhance his blood vitality. The second trial had comprised hungry ghosts that could supplement his soul force. The third trial consisted of beasts that increased his physical body strength. The fourth trial had the witch slave which enhanced the defensive power of his body. The fifth trial, mortal martial artists who were able to directly increase his cultivation. The sixth trial held no reward. As for the seventh trial, that was the world of the sorcerer, in which Lin Ming had comprehended his samsara martial intent. During the second Hungry Ghost trial, Lin Ming had used the power of thunder to kill many hungry ghosts as well as decapitated a massive beautiful woman who had been the king of hungry ghosts. These dead lingering spirits had transformed into a pure spiritual force that nourished Lin Ming's soul. But because there was simply too much soul force and Lin Ming's cultivation was limited, he had, at most, managed to absorb a fraction of it, the rest had been stored within his body. The excess blood vitality that had been absorbed from the blood devils was also temporarily stored within his body. And today, under this lucky coincidence, that pure soul force had been unexpectedly awakened, constantly injecting itself into his spiritual sea, nourishing his soul. Of course, it wasn't possible to instantly take all of it in one go. It was a very long process. But once this pure soul force was released, it wouldn't stop. It could be said that for a very long time in the future, Lin Ming's soul would constantly be strengthening itself even when he's eating or sleeping. What a pleasant surprise! After he accidentally connected to that pure soul force that had been buried beneath his spiritual sea, Lin Ming flushed red with excitement. Now that he had Bai Tinghua's help to absorb this, he wasn't willing to let this opportunity go. Under the support of the pure soul force, the ferocity of Lin Ming's soul attack became increasingly savage. How is this possible? He still has the strength to make another round of attack. Bai Tinghua thought he was going insane. Lin Ming's soul force consumption rate was 3 times his own, but he had lasted until now and actually had the strength to launch a new salvo of attacks. But as for him, he was already stretched to his limit, completely overwhelmed. Impossible. This is impossible. Even Huan Xiaodai is not such an abnormal freak. Huan Xiaodai was the direct disciple of the Mirage faction. In the 7 profound valleys, the disciples of the Mirage faction and Zither faction were mostly girls. In terms of strength, Huan Xiaodai was far superior to Bai Tinghua. He must have reached his limit. This must be his final effort before he completely collapses. Bai Tinghua was confident in his assumption. Lin Ming must have reached the limit of his power. Now, with this new unexpected round of even more violent attacks, this must be the side effect of some secret skill that he used on himself. Most martial artists that specialized in soul force techniques understood several secret skills that they could use in order to ensure their survival in a critical moment. For instance, there were many secret skills that used a form of self-hypnosis in order to stimulate the full potential of the soul. However, the human soul was very fragile. Once it was hurt, it was extremely difficult to heal. Therefore, this sort of secret skill tended to have extreme side effects. Of course, the 7 Profound Valleys Mirage faction had their own sets of secret skills. Relatively speaking, the side effects of these secret skills were much milder. Humph. You're not the only one with a secret skill. You think that just because you use it, I won't dare to do the same. Bai Tinghua's eyes were colored red anger. He was raging to the point of almost vomiting blood. This had originally been a simple friendly martial arts match, and yet his opponent had used a secret skill without regards to his own well-being. However, he had already spoken so much trash talk before this match. If he lost now, then he would absolutely become a complete laughingstock within the 7 Profound Valleys. *T. Not only that, but there were only 3 spots in the first tier. Fang Qi was such a freak of nature. Bai Tinghua had to admit that he was definitely not his match. As for Jing Chanyu, he wasn't completely confident in being able to defeat her. If he lost to Lin Ming now, then he would truly be placed in a precarious position. If one of the top 3 disciples of the Mirage faction couldn't enter into the first tier, then he wouldn't have the face to look anyone in the eye ever again. Thinking this, Bai Tinghua clenched his teeth. This father will fight with you. Blood Sacrifice Soul Alacrity Law. Chapter 252 Blood Sacrifice Soul Alacrity Law. Chapter 252 Blood Sacrifice Soul Alacrity Law. Chapter 252 Blood Sacrifice Soul Alacrity Law. My 7 Profound Valleys Soul Alacrity Law definitely has less backlash than yours. We'll see just who can hold out longer. Bai Tinghua was also ready to make any sacrifice necessary. This was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. Once his soul was damaged, at worst he would have to spend several months recovering in bed. He could just spend some of his sect points and use his connections to obtain a few bottles of the best soul recovery pills, and he'd be back in no time. But if he lost this match, not only would he lose all his face, his spirit would be so frustrated that it would negatively affect all of his future cultivation. Like this, the battle between Lin Ming and Bai Tinghua suddenly became extremely bitter and violent. Lin Ming's samsara martial intent was just like the ocean tide that never stopped. Bai Tinghua's monsters and ghosts, even after being shattered, were endlessly birthed from their remain. I defend, you attack, and you consume 3 times the soul force that I do. Coupled with the side effects from the secret soul skill you are using, I don't believe that your soul is made of iron. Let's see how many lives you have to handle this. In Bai Tinghua's opinion, Lin Ming was using some sort of forbidden soul technique, and the side effects of that technique would certainly be more dangerous than the one he was using. After all, Lin Ming was just some small countryside bumpkin martial artist. There was no way he had adequate or decent training in understanding the consequences of soul damage. If he can't get medicine in the future, his cultivation might even decline. Thinking this, Bai Tinghua was suddenly in an jubilant mood. He had originally been depressed after having been forced to use the blood sacrifice soul alacrity law, but now he was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, it didn't matter how miserable he would be. What was more important was how miserable his opponent would be. If a man faced death alone, then he would feel extreme terror. But if faced with the end of the world together, then there wasn't anything to fear. At this moment, Bai Tinghua's expression changed. In the dreamland world, the massive black vortex that had been giving him a headache suddenly disappeared. In its place a mass of hungry ghosts swelled up, thin bones protruding all over. These hungry ghosts had distorted limbs as if they were emaciated, and their heads were incomparably massive. Their mouths were twisted sideways, and sharp teeth glinted in the dark. Their blood-red tongue drooped downwards, constantly leaking saliva. Could this fellow actually have figured out the concept of using illusions to attack? Bai Tinghua's face darkened. Up until now, Lin Ming had only been using that massive black vortex to attack. But now he had summoned a horde of hungry ghosts. He thought that these hungry ghosts stemmed from the wilds of Lin Ming's imagination. Ashura King. After Bai Tinghua used the blood sacrifice soul alacrity law, Bai Tinghua's soul force had experienced an increase in strength. He was able to directly summon that Ashura King that was usually difficult to call down. Bang! The Ashura King smashed into the piles of hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts threw themselves on the Ashura King, frenziedly biting its body. Then, Bai Tinghua's face became extremely ugly. The Ashura King managed to resist for a while, before being slowly chewed apart. After the first half an hour, another quarter of an hour pass. The two were still standing on stage, a winner not yet decided. At this point, the Mirage faction disciples that were watching began to feel anxious and doubtful. If the match had reached this point, it could only mean that the situation in their soul battle was extremely dangerous. A physical injury would only take a few days to heal. Something like a fracture would take a few months. But if the soul was damaged, it might possibly take several years or even a lifetime to recover from. Even with the support of top-quality pills and medicines, it would still take several months to recover. The two individuals had been standing on stage for almost an hour, and yet there was no victor yet. Had they two of them gone all out against each other? Senior apprentice brother Bai has probably used the blood sacrifice soul alacrity law. If you look at his eyes you can see they are completely bloodshot. He's already reached his absolute limit. If he continues any longer, there's a chance his soul would be extremely hurt. Let's wait for another incense stick of time. If the match still isn't settled, then we will ask the referee to force it to an end. Even a draw would be fine. But I don't think that the Lin boy will be able to last another incense stick of time. You can tell from his red face that something's not right with him. Millimeter. I felt his soul force suddenly shoot up a moment ago. He definitely used some sort of secret soul skill to boost his power, and its strength is much greater than the blood sacrifice soul alacrity law. Normally speaking, the more potent a secret skill is, the greater its backlash will be. After Lin Ming galvanized the pure soul force that had been buried beneath his spiritual sea, it had caused the blood flow within his body to accelerate and thus his face had become flush red with blood. To a Mirage faction disciple, it was just like the deathly redness that occurred after using a soul-enhancing secret skill. Half an incense stick has passed, how can Lin Ming still persist? A Mirage faction disciple commented as he furrowed his brows. Something's wrong. The Mirage faction disciple felt something fishy was happening. Lin Ming had simply been able to last for too long a time. Moreover, his soul force power had suddenly experienced a great increase. Besides a soul-enhancing secret skill, there was no other explanation as to how that could have happened. Did Lin Ming have a secret skill that somehow didn't have any negative side effects? This was absolutely impossible. He immediately rejected this incredulous idea. If there really was a secret skill like this, then wouldn't a martial artist's soul force be all-powerful and endless? At this moment, a girl that was standing next to him raised a trembling finger and pointed towards the stage. She whispered, "Senior apprentice Brother Bai. His nose is bleeding. Millimeter." The disciple turned around and saw that 2 streams of blood were flowing down Bai Tinghua's nose, leaking past his mouth and unceasingly dripping down his chin. "This is bad. Stop the match. This other man is a crazy madman." At this moment, Bai Tinghua's body trembled, and then he slumped face down on the ground. Lin Ming, victory. With the referee's announcement, most of the audience only had a tepid reaction. This silly little stupid match was finally over. From the beginning to end, the two of them had only stood on stage staring at each other for almost an hour. What could be more boring than this match? Several disciples of the Mirage faction rushed on stage. Bai Tinghua's face was pallid, his eyes were bloodshot, and his nose was bloody. He had long lost consciousness. "Let's carry him off." The 20-year-old female disciple waved her hand, ordering everyone. She only had unpleasant feelings towards someone like Bai Tinghua, but for better or for worse, he was still one of the 3 top core disciples of the Mirage faction's younger generation. She looked at Lin Ming deeply, wanting to find some consequence he suffered from using a secret soul technique. However, she was disappointed as she found nothing. She didn't believe that there was a secret soul technique that didn't have any side effects. In that case, there could only be one possible explanation, and that was that Lin Ming had an extraordinarily overwhelming soul force capacity. He must have only prepared to be a weak soul force user, and then lured Bai Tinghua into a battle of attrition with him. The woman's voice was icy as she said, "You could already have one earlier, and yet you still deliberately led Bai Tinghua into fighting with you like this." Lin Ming had been walking off the stage, but hearing the woman's question he stopped in his tracks and glanced backwards. He didn't deny anything. After all, it would be impossible for him to clearly explain about the pure soul force that had been slumbering deep beneath his spiritual sea. He pointed at Bai Tinghua, who was lying on the ground, and said, "Believe whatever you want, but if I was the one lying on the ground right now, I believe that your junior apprentice brother would have been very happy to see me in a miserable state. I hadn't even used my full strength against him, and yet he turned out like this. Did he use some sort of forbidden secret skill? It's only a friendly martial arts contest. There was no need to push through a secret skill with side effects in order to deal with me. Does he have that great a hatred with me?" The woman was stunned, speechless. She couldn't find the words to refute Lin Ming. "I didn't force him to use any secret skill, this was something that he brought down upon himself, and yet you are actually blaming me for harming him. Is this the logical reasoning of your 7 Profound Valleys Mirage faction? Only you can bully others. Others cannot resist." The woman grit her teeth and said, "You obviously had ulterior motives and lured Bai Tinghua into this state. Your sly words and arguments are meaningless here. After entering the finals, you will encounter the Mirage faction's direct disciple, Huan Xiaodai. When that time comes, I hope you can fight like a man, and not immediately give up. Naturally, that isn't something you need worry about." Lin Ming finished his sentence and then turned around to walk off stage. The audience made room for Lin Ming to leave. In fact, to most people, Lin Ming's battle wasn't worthy of anything special. The match had lasted for almost a whole hour, and though he had defeated Bai Tinghua, it seemed that he had only done so reluctantly. His face had whitened, and then it had flushed red. Obviously, this fight had been extremely difficult for him. Lin Ming's strength was recognized as a bit higher than Bai Tinghua's. But how could this strength compare to someone like Jing Chanyu? The odds of the gambling house had changed. Now Jing Chanyu's odds were 1:1. Jing Chanchu's odds were 1:2, and Lin Ming's odds were 1:4. Because of the match between Bai Tinghua and Lin Ming, Jing Chanyu's odds had gone up whereas Lin Ming's odds had gone down. But the odds still favored Jing Chanyu. Throughout every single match so far, Jing Chanyu had maintained her calm. There hadn't even been an opponent who had managed to force her into taking a single step. No one knew just how much of her strength she had used to defeat Ziling. As for Lin Ming, he had already approached his limit in facing Bai Tinghua. Unless he had cards still hidden in his sleeve, then his chances of defeating Jing Chanyu weren't looking good. After the 5 total victory contestants in the 7th group finished their matches, the remaining matches weren't so interesting. Although everyone that had managed to pass the first group stage could be considered a master, there was simply too great a difference compared to the first few matches. Like this, the group stage advanced to the second round. Fang Qi was the first one to go on stage, and his opponent was Ziling. As for who his opponent was, Zhu Yang or Ziling, there was simply no difference to him. A single move, instant defeat. Fang Qi, victory. As the referee announced this, Ziling let out a sad, low-spirited sigh. She had been hoping to enter the first tier, but now that she had lost 2 straight matches, unless there was an accident, she would definitely lose to that Lin Ming fellow. Second round. Second match. The referee intentionally paused here, and all of the contestants pricked their ears up in attention. Because the matches were arranged completely according to the referee's wishes, none of the contestants knew who would be the next one called up. Second match, Lin Ming against Jing Chanyu. With this sentence, the entire audience rose in an uproar. Lin Ming against Jing Chanyu was absolutely the most anticipated match of the entire 7th group. The unbeatably Ziling and Bai Tinghua, who both had complete victories in the first group stage, had already been defeated. Now, there were only 3 people who were still undefeated, and 2 of those were Jing Chanyu and Lin Ming. As for Fang Qi against Jing Chanyu and Fang Qi against Lin Ming, truth be told, there wasn't much interest in those matches. In everyone's opinion, Fang Qi's victory was inevitable. A direct disciple was simply too strong. With his peak pulse condensation period cultivation, his strength was already equal to a middle Hutian master's. His position was simply unshakable. Thus, the most anticipated and the most suspenseful match was Jing Chanyu against Lin Ming. The majority's opinion was that as things stood, Jing Chanyu had a 70% chance of winning, and Lin Ming had a 30% chance of winning. But how true this was, it could only be found out through a true battle. Jing Chanyu's clothes fluttered in the wind as she landed in the center of the martial stage. Jing Chanyu greeted, "Grace venerate nation's disciple, Jing Chanyu." She still had her thin gauze veil on, her voice somewhat unreal and nebulous. Lin Ming cupped fists together in respect. "Lin Ming, please advise." Chapter 253 Absolute Defense. Chapter 253 Absolute Defense. Chapter 253 Absolute Defense. The 2 strong contestants faced each other as a chilling wind slowly blew across the martial stage, gently touching against Jing Chanyu's face veil. This face veil had never been lifted by any opponent's attack or true essence aftermath. This was the symbol of Jing Chanyu's tranquility, and also the reason that almost everyone had unanimously recognized her as the one who seized the title of champion amongst the 36 countries. This young girl had left an unfathomably deep feeling in everyone's heart. "You are very strong. Unfortunately, my cultivation method is a bit special. Your techniques will all become null in front of me." After the match started, Jing Chanyu and Lin Ming didn't immediately make their move. Instead, they looked at each other as Jing Chanyu slowly spoke. With her soft words, a hazy and dim halo of light began to condense around her, as if it were a translucent yellow eggshell. Seeing this eggshell, Lin Ming didn't have any reaction. In the audience, Ziling let out a heavy breath. When she had been fighting Jing Chanyu, her 36 light blade extreme execution had been blocked by this dainty-looking yellow eggshell. Ziling had confidence in the power of her 36 light blade extreme execution. However, once it entered that eggshell, it was like a blunt knife that was used to chop into a thick tree trunk. It moved forwards like a slowly, and the energy that gave her technique substance soon dissipated. Lin Ming was silent. His eyes closed and then opened, and the dark vortex of the endless samsara rushed straight towards Jing Chanyu, carrying a powerful pure soul force. Lin Ming used 90% of his soul force power in this strike. When he had been fighting against Bai Tinghua, Lin Ming had been gone easy on him. After Bai Tinghua used a soul alacrity law, Lin Ming had let him persist for another quarter-hour longer in order to better absorb the pure soul force that had been buried beneath his spiritual sea, and to also attain more enlightenment and comprehension of his samsara martial intent. Now that he faced Jing Chanyu, Lin Ming felt that his opponent had an extremely deep soul defense. Even if he went all out with his soul attack, he still might not win. Bang! The soul attack was invisible and had no substance, but when it fiercely impacted on the yellow eggshell, it still created a fierce distortion on the surface. Zzz. The yellow eggshell was like a soap bubble in the wind. Although it seemed to be on the verge of breaking, it still hadn't broken. The ring of tiles on the martial stage floor was shattered by the violent vibrations of the yellow eggshell, forming a spiderweb of spreading cracks. At the center of all this, Jing Chanyu was standing vigil, her eyes shut as she maintained her usual calm and quiet. The fierce storm of energy that was occurring outside of the yellow eggshell formed a distinct contrast with the peaceful expression of Jing Chanyu. Her clothes fluttered in the wind, her veil swayed, and many young martial artists were looking at her with obsessive infatuation shining in their eyes. Earth Attribute Martial Artist. Lin Ming realized that the thick eggshell contained an incomparably powerful Earth Attribute origin energy that had managed to fend off his formless soul attack. Yes, I was born with inborn Earth Attribute origin energy, with medium 6th grade fusion compatibility. My true essence shield is formed by my Earth Attribute origin energy, and is infamous for its defensive power and vitality. Not only can it defend against martial arts skills, but it can also defend against your soul attacks. This is my absolute defense. Although I am inferior to you in soul force and am also inferior to Bai Tinghua, I have a way to make your soul attacks null. Jing Chanyu's voice wasn't loud, but every word was still clearly heard. Medium 6th grade fusion. There weren't many martial artists that had specific attribute true essences. Not only that, but most who did only had a 3rd grade or 4th grade fusion. A 5th grade fusion was already extremely rare. As for a 6th grade fusion, that was rare even within the entire Sky Spill continent. A superior 5th grade fusion was a 100% fusion of true essence and a special attribute origin energy. As for a 6th grade fusion, that was when their attribute true essence penetrated into them and tempered their flesh and blood. No wonder Jing Chanyu was able to fight until now without moving a single step. She actually has such an absolute defense, she simply doesn't need to fear an attack from anyone, thus she has no need to hide or dodge. If Lin Ming can't break through her defensive eggshell, then she is in an invincible position. Now that Lin Ming's soul attacks no longer work, how else will he fight? The one who spoke was a minor martial artist who was one of the few that had bet on Lin Ming to win. He believed that the odds were good, but now looking at the situation, it was a possibility that he would lose everything. Hihi, you should have bet on Jing Chanyu. Although you might not have earned as much, the chances were much higher. A soul attack simply isn't the proper way of doing this. The only reason that Lin Ming was able to arrive here with his trivial peak bone forging cultivation was because he was relying on his soul attack trickery. His opponents were martial artists that didn't know how to defend against soul attacks, so they were caught off guard. Otherwise, how could pulse condensation period martial artists lose to a boy at the peak of bone forging? That Bai Tinghua was also stupid. Obviously he had some martial skills, so why would he want to compare soul attacks with Lin Ming? If he fought Lin Ming in a head-to-head martial arts contest, how could he possibly lose? Now that Lin Ming has encountered a martial artist who is proficient in soul force defense, there are no other tricks that Lin Ming can pull. The martial artist who spoke was in a good mood. He had placed 10 true essence stones on Jing Chanyu. Although he wouldn't make much of a profit, it was still enough for him to spend for some time. In the yellow eggshell, Jing Chanyu held her jade-white hands together, and that yellow hazy light covered her hands, just as if she were bathing in bright yellow lights. Is your attack over? Then, it's my turn. Since his soul attack wasn't working, Lin Ming simply pulled away his soul force. He smiled and said, warning your opponent before you attack, you really are confident in yourself. Jing Chanyu's red lips parted, and she began to form a series of seals with her hands as she said, this is just a friendly match, not a life and death struggle. Also, my attack is very difficult to hide from. Even if I told you, you cannot dodge it. Jing Chanyu was a girl with an upright and honest personality. She wasn't someone who exaggerated her words in order to show off her strength. If she said her skill could not be dodged, then it could not be dodged. Her seal-forming fingers began to move faster and faster until they became a series of blurs. In a short period of 2 breaths, she had formed 1,000 seals. Halcyon reflection, 1,000 shaded hands. Jing Chanyu turned her hands up and a series of dense finger-shaped shadows condensed, shooting out like a volley of radiant arrows, shadowing the sky. In an instant, Lin Ming was surrounded by these finger shadows on all sides. These countless shadow fingers broke through the air, sizzling sounds following in their wake. There were thousands of these shadows. Halcyon reflection, 1,000 shaded hands. Since this move dared to call itself 1,000 shaded hands, it of course lived up to its well-deserved reputation. No wonder she said it's undodgeable, there's just no way to avoid all these. Previously, when Ziling had personally experienced this move, she had almost been instantly struck by these nearly invisible shadows, and was then defeated by Jing Chanyu's Halcyon Reflection Great Wisdom Palm. Ziling was fully aware of just how strong this move was. There was simply no opportunity to resist. She believed that if Lin Ming was struck by the Halcyon Reflection 1,000 shaded hands, he would have no way to avoid the following Halcyon Reflection Great Wisdom Palm. The result of that would be defeat. Facing against the thousands of finger shadows of Halcyon Reflection 1,000 shaded hands, if it were someone like Fang Qi, he could easily block all of them with his overwhelming strength. But to dodge them? Ziling didn't think this was possible. Assemble. Jing Chanyu gathered her hands together, and all of the finger shadows attacked Lin Ming together. Lin Ming's lips curved up in a mischievous smile, golden rock shattering the void. Pa 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 pa. In that moment, it was unknown how many of those finger shadows pierced Lin Ming. They passed through his body, slicing through the floor and shattering the tiles, sending crushed stone flying into the air. The audience didn't even have to cry out in alarm. But at this moment, Lin Ming's form disappeared. His form had only been an after-image. There he is. A spectator cried out and pointed his finger at the sky. The audience followed his gaze, but could only see shadows, a series of blurs that shunted across the air. It was impossible to tell which one was the true Lin Ming. Ta 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 ta. Lin Ming's body was like swirling whirlwind. With his keen perception, he was able to clearly grasp the location of every finger shadow. He discovered that these finger shadows had had a first and a last. It wasn't a volley. It must have been difficult for even Jing Chanyu to simultaneously control these thousands of finger shadows. Lin Ming saw a gap between the thousands of finger shadows. Like a swift storm, he crossed through. With the support of the concept of wind, Lin Ming's movements were like a liquid dream. Even when the audience saw that he had been forced into a corner and could no longer dodge, when his true self seemed to be pierced by the shadow fingers, it turned out to only be an afterimage left behind by Lin Ming. To be able to maintain such a high velocity and turning ability in a dense rain of shadows, the audience could only gasp and exclaim again and again. This extreme speed under the collisions and explosions was simply an unprecedented visual feast. Good speed. Even Mu Qinghong, who was sitting in the grand hall, was shocked. For a 16-year-old boy to have this sort of agility was simply inconceivable. The thousands of finger shadows were even faster than arrows. Not only that, but they were controlled by human sense. There was simply no order or law that governed their attack path. In order to dodge them, one needed not only speed, but amazingly keen perception and instant judgment. Whiz 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 whiz. In this storm of chaos, Lin Ming managed to completely avoid every attack and approach Jing Chanyu's side. Jing Chanyu finally lost all of her former calm. Her pair of limpid eyes were wide with bewilderment as she started at Lin Ming, and her heart was madly beating within her chest. Just what was this fellow going to do? Remembering that she had an absolute defense covering her, Jing Chanyu felt a little peace of mind. But at this moment, the rapidly moving Lin Ming suddenly lifted his fist. This strong defense was truly able to place many martial artists in a predicament. However, this was no problem for Lin Ming. Flow like silk was especially useful for subduing defense-based martial artists. The true essence would directly penetrate through all defenses, and completely collapse the internal structure of any defense with extreme vibration. All of the tiny units in Lin Ming's body began to breathe at the same time. Lin Ming's true essence stirred, and 5,000 vibrating true essence filaments condensed onto his right hand. Body-tearing, bone-shattering fists. Lin Ming gave a shout. His punch was just like flood dragon goes to sea. Bang! Lin Ming's solid punch landed against the shield. 5,000 vibrating true essence filaments roared forwards, and began to disintegrate the integrity and structure of Jing Chanyu's eggshell. Ka. The sound of shattering glass filled the ears. Although this eggshell had been called an absolute defense, at this moment it was cracking apart like a pane of glass, breaking into thousands upon thousands of tiny pieces. Vibrating true essence was able to tear apart anything it entered. If Lin Ming was able to enter the realm of creating hundreds of millions of vibrating true essence filaments, then Flow like silk would be able to turn everything it touched to dust. Seeing with her own eyes the dissolution of her absolute defense by Lin Ming's fist, Jing Chanyu was spooked beyond all measure. What? How was this possible? Jing Chanyu wasn't someone who liked to brag. If she dared to call her ability an absolute defense, then she had complete confidence in it. Her yellow eggshell was outlandishly tough. Facing any powerful attack, it would only deform, but would not break. But now, it couldn't even deform, it directly shattered into pieces. Chapter 254 Digging for Talent. Chapter 254 Digging for Talent. Chapter 254 Digging for Talent. If Lin Ming had released a supremely formidable martial skill that was able to shatter her defense, she would not have been surprised. But it had only been a punch, it was simply impossible to condense enough energy onto that fist. That casual blow he sent out wasn't even with a weapon. Or maybe he had always been a fist-fighting martial artist. The current situation had already gone beyond any of Jing Chanyu's calculations. She was extremely startled. After Lin Ming broke apart her absolute defense, he grasped towards her jade-like neck. Jing Chanyu shook as if an earthquake passed through her, and her face turned incomparably white. At such a close range, it was impossible to use any martial skills, but could she use speed to dodge him? Jing Chanyu had never excelled at speed, but even if she did, could she compare to someone like Lin Ming? He was some abnormal freak that had managed to continuously avoid her halcyon reflection 1,000 shaded hands. Jing Chanyu did not believe for a second that she could accomplish something similar. At this critical juncture, Jing Chanyu formed her hand into a saber, and chopped down at Lin Ming's wrist. Although Jing Chanyu seemed like a delicate and gossamer lady, anyone who assumed she would be weak because of her physical charms was sorely mistaken. Jing Chanyu had reached a medium 6th grade fusion with her Earth attribute true essence. She had already achieved the stage of using her elemental origin energy to temper her body. Usually if she didn't use true essence, her body would seem soft and liquid-like, but once she imbued her body with true essence, her body would be as strong as a treasure weapon. Therefore Jing Chanyu didn't need to use a weapon, because her body was in itself a marvelous natural weapon. Jing Chanyu had wanted to force Lin Ming to retreat with her hand saber, but hadn't thought that not only would Lin Ming not react, he would keep rushing towards her. This fellow. Jing Chanyu was finally angry. She clenched her beautiful jade teeth tight, and her left hand chopped down. If a normal martial artist were struck by this, they would suffer the fate of having their bones fractured. Peng! Her hand cut down on Lin Ming's wrist, but Jing Chanyu's face drained of blood right after. She felt as if her hand saber had cut down on dark steel. Not only was Lin Ming's hand not affected in the least, but she felt her own arm lose feeling from the backlash reverberations. Was his body made of iron or something? She only had enough time to think this single thought. In the next moment, Lin Ming's hand already wrapped around her tender neck and his 5 fingers gripped tightly against her throat and carotid artery. As long as Lin Ming put in just a bit of strength, he could have immediately killed Jing Chanyu. Jing Chanyu's veil had originally covered down to her neck, but in that fierce impact when Lin Ming had grabbed onto her, the veil that was the symbol of her tranquility was pulled down, revealing Jing Chanyu's beautiful and mysterious face. You! Jing Chanyu's eyes flashed with a sullen anger. Well fought. Lin Ming withdrew his hand, bowed in a gesture of respect and then turned to leave the stage. If it hadn't been his hand a moment ago but instead his spear, then Jing Chanyu's throat would have been nothing but a bloody hole. The outcome of this battle had already been decided. Lin Ming, victory. As the referee announced the victor, the audience was stunned by the sudden turn in events. What had just happened a moment ago? Lin Ming used his fist. And he had shattered Jing Chanyu's absolute defense with a single punch. There wasn't even true essence condensed onto his fist. This match between Lin Ming and Jing Chanyu had already undergone all sorts of analysis in the minds of the audience. Still, no one thought that the end result would turn out like this. It was just as when Jing Chanyu had defeated Zi Ling. It only took several breaths of time for Lin Ming to defeat Jing Chanyu. Not only that, but he didn't use the soul force attacks that he was known for. Instead, he had used his fist. Isn't Lin Ming a soul force attack expert? How come he used his fist? The path of martial arts was limitless and profound. For someone so young like Lin Ming, it was already excellent that they were skilled in a single aspect. A soul force attack was already an extremely obscure and esoteric method of fighting. To be able to achieve good success in this ability, one had to invest a great amount of time within it. Naturally, other aspects of their training would lag behind. But now it looked like Lin Ming didn't know just soul attacks. If Lin Ming knew some swordsmanship, then the audience wouldn't have been too surprised. But a fist. This sort of attack method was simply too different from a soul attack. It was just too difficult to link the two together. You've done well. Qin Zia praised as Lin Ming walked off stage. Although Qin Zia sounded calm, his mind was actually surging with an overwhelming tide of feelings and emotions. At first, he had estimated that Lin Ming had high hopes of entering the top 20 ranks, but after he had arrived at the Seven Profound Valleys total faction and seen such geniuses like Zhong Yangjiao, the Jingchan duo, and others emerge from the shadows one at a time, Qin Zia's confidence had been somewhat shaken. But now it seemed as if he had underestimated Lin Ming by far. Lin Ming reached the first tier, which also meant he had entered into the top 30 ranks. And yet he still hadn't used his spear. Did this mean that there was a chance Lin Ming would enter into the top 10 ranks during his first total faction martial meeting? Thinking this, Qin Zia felt a giddiness surge within him. Although the top 10 and top 20 sounded close, the truth was, there was a massive difference between them. The top 10 rankings were nearly completely dominated by direct disciples. There were some large factions like the Sword faction and the Acacia faction that had bountiful resources and numerous disciples. The resources that the second-ranked disciple received wouldn't be that much different from the direct disciple. In other words, these top-level direct disciples already filled the top 10. If a disciple wished to enter into the top 10, then they would have to struggle against these direct disciples. Ever since the Seven Profound Valleys total faction martial meeting had begun, the 36 countries and 16 martial families had produced a number of amazing talents that were able to enter into the top 20 rankings, such as Zhong Yangjiao. There were many talents that had entered into the top 20. But to enter into the top 10? There had only been a few. If Lin Ming was able to enter the top 10 of the total faction meeting during his first time, then what about his second time? Or third time? Lin Ming had only just reached 16 years of age. He still had 2 more total faction martial meetings he could attend. Qin Zia didn't dare to imagine what could happen. Lin Ming's growth was simply too terrifying. He guessed that after this martial meeting, Lin Ming might even be selected to enter the total faction ahead of time. With the support of the total faction's resources and cultivation methods, then Lin Ming might even become the champion of the next martial meeting. Compared to his own hopes, that would have been 3 years early. Of course, even if Lin Ming entered into the total faction, his achievements would partially be attributed to Qin Zia. But thinking that just as his Sky Fortune Kingdom's 7 profound martial house had raised a genius like this with so much difficulty, they had to instantly send him away, Qin Zia felt a bit melancholic. In the Grand Hall of the 7 Profound Valleys, Mu Qinghong had been following Lin Ming's match from beginning to end. Haha, fairy maiden Qinghong seems to have some interest in that young boy. This is a talent that my 7 profound valleys has cultivated with care. He is a good seedling. At the side of Mu Qinghong, 7 profound valley master Shi Zongtian was laughing with a big smile as he spoke. Mu Qinghong was still quietly observing Lin Ming with her soul force, looking indifferent to the situation. Shi Zongtian had no idea what sort of thoughts Mu Qinghong was thinking. He only thought that maybe she had been drawn in by Lin Ming's exemplary performance. Lin Ming had also caught Shi Zongtian's attention. To have such strength at the peak bone forging stage was just too eye-catching. It was hard not to notice. However, although Shi Zongtian kept note of Lin Ming, he hadn't investigated any information on Lin Ming's background. Lin Ming had been revealed to be a soul talent genius, but soul attacks just weren't the right way to do things. Once he tried to attack the Xiantian realm, he would experience an insurmountable bottleneck. To Shi Zongtian, this meant that Lin Ming wasn't worth caring about. But now it seemed that Lin Ming wasn't just a simple soul force master after all. Mu Qinghong looked at Shi Zongtian and chuckled in her heart. According to the data she had obtained from Mu Qianyu, although Lin Ming was technically a disciple of the 7 profound valleys, he hadn't been cultivated with care as Shi Zongtian had claimed. He wasn't even a disciple of the 7 profound valleys total faction, but just someone who had been hanging around at a 7 profound martial house. She smiled and said, "He truly is a good seedling. With such strength at his age, his future will be bright and limitless." Valley Master Shi's ability to find talents like this is praiseworthy. Hearing such high appraisal coming from the lofty Mu Qinghong, Shi Zongtian felt his own mood soar to the sky. Before a top-tier 4th grade sect, Shi Zongtian was naturally happy to show off the strength of his sect. "I didn't really think that such a genius would emerge at this total faction martial meeting. It looks like I need to recruit him into the martial house ahead of time. Such a good seedling is just wasted within the 36 countries. 36 countries? Shi Zongtian suddenly realized something. He sent out a true essence sound transmission to a servant and said, "Look up which country Lin Ming from the 7th group came from." Shi Zongtian suddenly felt a foreboding omen creeping up. This Lin Ming couldn't possibly come from Sky Fortune Kingdom. An answer soon arrived back, and that unlucky feeling in Shi Zongtian's heart came true. Lin Ming really was from Sky Fortune Kingdom. He turned his head to glance at Mu Qinghong, and his expression became somewhat ugly. He remembered that just when the martial meeting had started, Mu Qinghong had asked which stage the participants of Sky Fortune Kingdom were at. At first, Shi Zongtian had thought it was strange that Mu Qinghong of all people would ask something like this. But now, it seemed as if the reason was because of Lin Ming. If he hadn't guessed wrong, then the reason Mu Qinghong came to the 7 profound valleys to specifically observe the total faction martial meeting was to look for Lin Ming, a dignified and haughty fairy maiden of divine Phoenix Island with an extreme Xiantian cultivation would actually travel all this way to look for a little boy from Sky Fortune Kingdom with a peak bone forging stage cultivation. This was just too ridiculous. "How old is Lin Ming?" Shi Zongtian asked a servant again with true essence sound transmission. Reporting to the Valley Master, Lin Ming has just reached 16 years of age. To have reached a cultivation at the peak bone forging stage at only 16 years of age, he must have at least a 6th grade martial talent. Within the 7 profound valleys, a 6th grade talent was already at the top. But placed within divine Phoenix Island, a 6th grade talent was only SOSO. It wasn't a reason for someone like Mu Qinghong to personally come to the 7 profound valleys. That meant that there were other aspects of Lin Ming that were worth Mu Qinghong's attention, but he still didn't know what these were. Realizing this point, Shi Zongtian's complexion became increasingly ugly. The 4th grade sect Divine Phoenix Island would actually come to his little corner of land in order to search for talent. Although they were a 4th grade sect and the 7 profound valleys was only a 3rd grade sect, and the difference in their strength was too great, they still couldn't bully them like such. "Is there a problem, Valley Master Shi?" Mu Qinghong saw that Shi Zongtian was looking awful at the moment, so she smiled as she asked him. She noticed that Shi Zongtian's servant had left for a bit a moment ago, and was able to vaguely guess what had just happened. Shi Zongtian forced a smile and said with a low voice, "Is Fairy Maiden Qinghong old acquaintances with my sect's disciple Lin Ming?" "No. It's just because of some coincidence that little brother Lin knows my family's young mistress." Young mistress. Shizongtian almost wanted to jump out of his seat. The young mistress of Mu Qinghong could only be a single person, the saintess of Divine Phoenix Island, Mu Qianyu. Lin Ming actually was personally acquainted with Mu Qianyu. What was happening? How could Lin Ming possibly know the saintess of Divine Phoenix Island? An existence like her would have a high status even if placed in the entire South Horizon region of Sky Spill continent. Even he had to bow if he saw her. Chapter 255 Entering the First Tier. Chapter 255 Entering the First Tier. Chapter 255 Entering the First Tier. Shizongtian knew that there were two great saintess of Divine Phoenix Island. Both were 7th grade talents, and both had 7th grade fusions with an element. The Blue Luan saintess attribute was water, and the Vermilion Bird saintess attribute was fire. They had reached pulse condensation at 15, Hutian at 17, Xiantian at 22, Extreme Xiantian at 26, and at 27 years of age they had taken a half step into the revolving core realm. Compared to monstrous talents like this, their so-called gathering of talents, the total faction martial meeting, was more like a gathering of blabbering toddlers. Thinking of Mu Qianyu, Shizongtian couldn't really muster up any courage to resist. After all, Divine Phoenix Island could casually send one of their elders to the 7 profound valleys, and not even the elder ancestor of the 7 profound valleys would be their match. Even if it was Mu Qianyu, with her half-step revolving core cultivation, and her true strength that far surpassed a similar martial artist, she might not necessarily be any worse than their elder ancestor. Shizongtian couldn't help but wonder if Divine Phoenix Island really didn't care about giving face to their sect. How should he manage this situation? Lin Ming was still only a 7 profound martial house disciple. He wasn't a true disciple of the 7 profound valleys. If he left, it wouldn't really be considered as betraying his sect. Not only that, but the resources that Divine Phoenix Island could provide him far exceeded what the 7 profound valleys could offer. If he stood in Lin Ming's shoes, then even he would favor Divine Phoenix Island. Compared to Divine Phoenix Island, Shizongtian simply didn't have any confidence. Shizongtian let loose a heavy breath and then asked, Fairy Maiden Qinghong, is it really for so simple a reason like searching for a friend of Her Highness the Saintess that you came to the 7 profound valleys? Mu Qinghong laughed. Is Valley Master Shi worried about something? Shizongtian calmly said, Lin Ming is a disciple of my 7 profound valleys. As far as I know, he is only a student of Sky Fortune Kingdom's 7 profound martial house. Shizongtian furrowed his eyebrows. He wasn't able to refute this point. Thinking back to when he had been boasting, he felt a bit embarrassed. After a period of awkward silence passed, Shizongtian suddenly felt that something wasn't right. Maybe Mu Qianyu knew Lin Ming, but even so, why would Mu Qianyu not contact Lin Ming secretly? All she had to do was take the first step and offer favorable conditions to win over Lin Ming to join Divine Phoenix Island. Why come to their 7 profound valleys total faction martial meeting? Even the reward for becoming the champion of the total faction martial meeting, a heaven opening pill, wasn't anything to Divine Phoenix Island. Shizongtian couldn't figure out this riddle, but he also didn't ask why. At this time, Mu Qinghong said, In truth, my family's young mistress has not thought to steal any disciples from your 7 profound valleys. In fact, our Divine Phoenix Island may be abundant in resources, but our highest cultivation methods are not suited for men to cultivate. Valley Master Shi can accept Lin Ming as an official disciple of the 7 profound valleys after the martial meeting. Even in the future, if the 7 profound valleys cannot provide sufficient resources to Lin Ming, then our Divine Phoenix Island can also provide some help. Is there really such a good thing? Although Mu Qinghong promised to help Lin Ming with additional resources, it felt a little bit overkill even though he may be friends with Mu Qianyu. Mu Qianyu had personally paid attention this boy, and had even sent Mu Qinghong. In Shizongtian's opinion, no matter how much of a talent Lin Ming was, he was still a child that hadn't grown up. Was Mu Qianyu betting on Lin Ming becoming a middle revolving core master in the future? Or even a late revolving core master? There were countless genius within the Sky Spill continent, but the number that could reach the revolving core stage were truly few in number. In the 600 years of heritage within the 7 profound valleys, Only their elder ancestor had reached the revolving core realm. This is the only reason Fairy Maiden Qinghong came today? Shizongtian asked, somewhat doubtful. Haha, this was just in passing. There is actually something that I need to discuss with Valley Master Shi. After Mu Qinghong said this, her expression turned somewhat serious. Please speak, Fairy Maiden Qinghong. This is a very important matter, it will take more than a while to tell you. Let's wait for this martial meeting to finish, and then I'll speak in further detail. Seeing Mu Qinghong's solemn expression, Shizongtian could only agree and not pursue the matter any further. As for what matter Divine Phoenix Island would come look to him for, he had no idea. After the match between Lin Ming and Jing Chanyu had finished, the gambling house had decided that Lin Ming would win the championship of the 36-country bet ahead of time. As for the latter matches in the 7th group, they had all lost suspense. Many contestants had completely given up on competing against Lin Ming. Instead, they tried to preserve their strength in order to struggle for the 2nd tier. Lin Ming won the 3rd round, the 4th round, the 5th round, until the 6th round where he encountered Ziling. Ziling was one of the 5 players that entered into the 2nd group stage with a complete string of victories. Naturally, Ziling trusted in her own strength. But she had lost against Jing Chanyu in only 2 moves, and then Jing Chanyu had lost against Lin Ming in 2 moves. The person who had taken a second to defeat her was defeated in a second by Lin Ming. Ziling was well aware of the disparity between her and Lin Ming. But still, Ziling didn't admit defeat. Even though she had a steady position in the 2nd tier, she wasn't yet willing to admit defeat without putting up a fight, because this went against her heart of martial arts. After the match started, Ziling didn't bother with hiding herself in diffracted light. She knew that in front of Lin Ming, who had an extremely formidable soul force, hiding herself was simply deceiving herself. She took out her sword of light and began to display her ultimate move. I've placed everything in this strike, 36 light blade extreme execution. Kai 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 kai. The 36 blades of light shot out in all directions towards Lin Ming. Lin Ming seemed to take a single step forwards and then suddenly appeared like a phantom in front of Ziling, a punch flying out. Peng. Lin Ming only used a mere 1,000 vibrating true essence filaments to shatter Ziling's protective true essence. And then he turned his fist into a claw and gently took hold of Ziling's neck. As expected, the match was finished in a moment. Lin Ming, victory. As the referee announced the result, Ziling let out a light breath, somewhat depressed. When she faced Lin Ming, it was just as if an ordinary person faced a vicious and savage tiger with just bare fists. There was simply no way of resisting. Therefore Lin Ming won 6 straight victories. He had guaranteed himself a spot in the 1st tier. He's too strong. Besides Bai Tinghua, there hasn't been anyone who could engage Lin Ming in an extended fight. Not only that, but all these fights have been ended in a few moves. When Lin Ming was facing Bai Tinghua, the only reason it took so long was likely because Lin Ming was deliberately hiding his cards. Although Lin Ming defeating Ziling was what everyone expected, the easy and relaxed manner in which he won caused the audience to be full of praise. Next, Jing Chanyu against Fang Qi. Fang Qi was the default first-place contestant in Group 7. Group 7 had 10 contestants, and each contestant fought in 8 matches. They would only miss a single person. Since Fang Qi was a seeded player, the one who would dodge him would be the other powerhouse of the group. Since Jing Chanyu lost to Lin Ming, she was to be the opponent of Fang Qi. Before Fang Qi walked up stage, he didn't even glance at Jing Chanyu. Instead, he approached Lin Ming with a faint smile tracing his lips. As a disciple of the 36 countries, you're quite good. You even might enter the top 10 rankings. At the next Total Faction Martial meeting, you might be my match. Oh. The next time. Lin Ming faintly smiled. These 7 profound Valley Direct disciples were just too confident in themselves, to the point of being needlessly arrogant. Of course, Lin Ming didn't fault them. They had grown up since children with the halo of genius around them. Not only that, but they were also disciples of the Total Faction. That sense of superiority and entitlement was already deeply ingrained within their bones. Yes, during the next martial meeting you'll have the qualifications to make me be serious. In Fang Qi's opinion, he had already given Lin Ming a very high evaluation. Chapter 256 – The final competition begins. Chapter 256 – The final competition begins. Chapter 256 – The final competition begins. Are you not convinced by what I'm saying? Fang Qi faintly smiled as he noticed Lin Ming's somewhat disinterested expression. It's already a fantastic result for a disciple of the 36 countries to have the qualifications to reach the top 10 ranks in their first total faction martial meeting. Although your natural talent is shocking, it's a pity that your cultivation is too low. Fang Qi waggled his fingers as he shook his head. Wait until your strength reaches the middle pulse condensation period and maintain your ability to fight above your cultivation. If you can do so, then you will have the qualifications that make you worthy to be my match. But as for some other people, that might not be enough. Lin Ming was stunned. The core disciples of the 7 profound valleys were just too arrogant. Fang Qi was naturally a proud person, but from his words it seemed that even he admitted he was inferior to some others. This other people that he mentioned could only be extremely abnormal. Fang Qi didn't intend to speak anymore, and he jumped on stage, stretching out his fingers as he faced Jing Chanyu. This match will be decided in 5 breaths of time. Lin Ming had used 15 breaths of time in order to defeat Jing Chanyu. Fang Qi would settle this in 5, which was 1/3 of Lin Ming's time. This was to deliberately show those young geniuses of the 7 profound valleys that the martial artists from the 36 countries were inferior to them. Fang Qi, you can do it. Destroy her in 1 second, destroy her. As Fang Qi's voice fell, the audience burst into cheers. This was the home of the 7 profound valleys, and there were also many array faction disciples in the audience, and they had a good impression of their faction's direct disciple, Fang Qi. Naturally, he also had an extremely high popularity. In particular, there were many people that had lost a great deal of money because of Lin Ming and Jing Chanyu, and they wanted to vent their feelings. At this time, Jing Chanyu was using a new veil. She didn't have any reaction, even seeing the overwhelming one-sided support towards her opponent. She had the same absolute defense that surrounded her when she fought Lin Ming, except this time it was much thicker. She intended to thoroughly frustrate Fang Qi for looking down on her so much. She knew that she was inferior to Fang Qi, but she wouldn't let him easily end this match in 5 breaths of time. Match, begin. As the referee announced the beginning of the match, Fang Qi's 10 fingers quickly linked together at a terrifying speed as he formed golden symbol after golden symbol. The speed at which he formed his seals was a blur, and in just a breath of time, 100 symbols flew out of Fang Qi's hand and soared towards Jing Chanyu. In the second breath of time, all of these golden symbols completely surrounded Jing Chanyu. In the midst of this dangerous energy, Jing Chanyu could only grit her teeth and supplement the shield that was guarding her with everything she had. She was a martial artist of the 36 countries. Facing a disciple of the 7 profound valleys who looked down on her with nothing but contempt, she could only suppress the anger in her heart. At this time, Jing Chanyu only had one thought on her mind, and that was to never let Fang Qi easily win. She would fight for the honor of the 36 countries. Golden Octagon Lock. Fang Qi clasped his hands together, and those hundreds of golden symbols that surrounded Jing Chanyu congealed together into 8 formation arrays that struck Jing Chanyu's protection. Catcher. That protective eggshell was tightened by an invisible chain, severely distorting. Jing Chanyu paled, and true essence surged within her body. In that split second, her protection had almost burst open. Millimeter? Fang Qi lightly sneered. It seemed that his opponent's protective barrier had exceeded his imagination. Heaven and earth sword formation. Fang Qi thrust out his hand. 36 blades of light flew out from his body and landed near Jing Chanyu. The sword light seemed to undulate, as if the air itself was being cut apart by the swords. The sharp sword energy pierced Jing Chanyu's protective defense. Kai 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 kai. In that moment, the 36 blades of light had punctured Jing Chanyu's protection like a porcupine. It had only been 3 breaths of time. Jing Chanyu clenched her teeth. She didn't think of attack, everything she had was placed into her defense. She galvanized the true essence within her body to the extreme. Her determination would not waver. She would bet everything she had to last past the fifth breath. The protective eggshell severely deformed, and the sword energy seemed to slow down. Still, in the blink of an eye, Jing Chanyu had already been pressed to her limit. When Zi Ling had used the 36 light blades to strike her, her move had been melted away by Jing Chanyu's protection. But now, it was the opposite. Fang Qi's sword energy was too strong. In just a breath of time his swords had pierced through her protection. Pa pa pa. Although the protective eggshell shield hadn't broken, the 36 light blades had already pierced through, pointing at Jing Chanyu from all directions. With just a thought from Fang Qi, Jing Chanyu would be cut to pieces. Fang Qi, victory. With the referee's announcement, just 5 breaths of time had passed. Only 5 breaths. Ha, he truly is the direct disciple of the Array faction. Senior apprentice Brother Fang is too amazing. The audience resounded with thunderous cheers, especially from those disciples of the Array faction. Many of the female disciples of the 7 profound valleys even dropped their modesty and let out clear screams. Obviously, they had long held a liking towards Fang Qi. In fact, of the 7 profound valleys' 7 direct disciples, except for the strange and weird puppet faction direct disciple, all the other 6 direct disciples were greatly welcomed and popular among girls. Even Ouyang Ming of the Acacia faction, who was known as a player, was no different. There were many girls that dreamed of one day being able to marry them. Even being a concubine would be nice, as that would greatly increase the resources they would have. Jing Changyu removed her protective shield and walked down the stage. Under the barrage of endless boos from the enemy audience, her sense of desolation and disorientation was indescribable. As a proud woman who had grown up under the halo of being a heavenly genius, she was representing the 36 countries on behalf of their honor. And yet, the outcome of this match was, the opponent had said he would end the match in 5 breaths, and he really had ended it in 5 breaths. No matter how hard she had tried, she was unable to change this. She hadn't even been able to force him to use his full strength. Was the difference in their power truly so great? As she inadvertently looked up, she saw Lin Ming standing on the side, his hands folded behind his back. His expression was someone plain and casual. Lin Ming. After seeing Fang Qi's formidable strength with his own eyes, how could he maintain such a calm expression? What sort of cards did he have in his hands? Would he be able to defeat Fang Qi? Jing Chanyu couldn't believe that was possible. Maybe Lin Ming was only a person who was unwilling to admit defeat. He might reach the top, but if he did, he would inevitably clash with the direct disciples of the 7 profound valleys. Are you okay? Lin Ming could imagine what Jing Chanyu was feeling at this time. She had desperately gone all out, and yet she had still suffered so miserably. As a proud woman of Grace Venerate Nation, the damage to Jing Chanyu's self-esteem could be imagined. Jing Chanyu stubbornly nodded her head. Lin Ming smiled and turned to leave. He only came to express his polite condolences to someone who was once his opponent. At this moment, Jing Chanyu suddenly said, Lin Ming, millimeter? What's the matter? Lin Ming turned his head. To his surprise, he could hear that Jing Chanyu sounded somewhat excited. Jing Chanyu hesitated, nipped her red lips and asked, can you win? Lin Ming was slightly stunned. Suddenly, he brilliantly smiled and nodded, I can. He hadn't even asked who he needed to win against. I meant to ask if you could defeat Fang Qi. It's all the same. Jing Chanyu was shocked speechless. Even she didn't expect such an absurd dialogue between them. If they were heard by the disciples of the 7 profound valleys, they would probably laugh until they were rolling on the ground. She had asked if Lin Ming could win, not if he could defeat Fang Qi. Yet Lin Ming hadn't even asked any questions. Even after she pointed out Fang Qi, his reply had still been, it's all the same. This answer was filled with a complete and absolute confidence. It implied that Fang Qi was merely one of the opponents that he would defeat, and that he would be first. What did Lin Ming want to do? Did he not want to struggle for the top 5, but the top 3? Thinking this, Jing Chanyu gasped. She didn't know why, but she had a gut instinct that trusted in Lin Ming. Perhaps it was because of his confidence, or maybe it was because of Jing Chanyu's own sentinel emotions, but regardless of whatever the reason was, Lin Ming was now the only contestant of the 36 countries who remained undefeated. Grace Venerate Nation could only come so far. Jing Chanyu's older brother had also lost. Jing Chanyu guessed that she and her twin would end up in the final rankings between 20 and 40. The only one that could go on to represent the 36 countries was one person, Lin Ming. Lin Ming, you have to win, Jing Chanyu slowly said, stressing every syllable. Millimeter. At the very least, I will defeat Fang Qi. Lin Ming wasn't blindly arrogant, rampant, or stupid. If even someone as proud as Fang Qi admitted that the other 7 direct disciples were superior to him, that meant that the disparity between them was very big. Facing opponents like them, he feared that his matches would not be so easy. After he parted ways with Jing Chanyu, it was already time for lunch. Now that every other group stage match had been basically settled, the only ones to enter into the first tier from the 36 countries were Jing Chanyu and Lin Ming. Jing Chanyu's older brother Jing Chansha was off by 1 point, and barely missed making the first tier. As for Ling Sen, in his 8 matches he had won 2 and lost 6. He finally entered into the 3rd tier. Besides Ling Sen, Huluo Nation's Wang Mu and Easter Sun Country's Zhao Yong also entered the 3rd tier. Thus, out of all the disciples of the 36 countries, 6 of them were able to enter into the top 100 rankings of the total faction martial meeting. Of those, Sky Fortune Kingdom had 2 disciples, and Lin Ming was ranked first among the 36 countries. This was an event that had never shown up in the history of Sky Fortune Kingdom. Qin Xingxuan was also thrilled to receive 120 true essence stones as a reward. She had bet 20 true essence stones on Lin Ming to win when his compensation rate had been 1:6. With Lin Ming's victory, she had gained a net total of 100. 100 true essence stones was equal to 100,000 gold taels. This was a great sum of money even to someone like Qin Xingxuan. The second round of the group matches had finished by the afternoon. At that time, all the contestants were able to rest for the night. On the next day, the final tournament would begin. The first tier had 30 people, of which 20 were still undefeated. Of these 20 people, 7 of them were direct disciples. Before the final showdown, these 7 disciples wouldn't normally meet in a match. Besides the direct disciples, there were 3 or 4 top core disciples of the 7 factions. These individuals were only inferior to the direct disciples. For instance, Jiang Lanjian was one of them. There were many disciples of the 7 profound valleys that had already subconsciously placed Jiang Lanjian as a master equal to the 7 direct disciples. Of the remaining people, several of them were great figures within their factions. As long as they had enough resources, they were hopeful in breaking through to the Xiantian realm. There were 7 direct disciples, 3 to 4 top core disciples, and several other influential core disciples. Altogether, this was 18 people in total. The 19th person was Zhong Yangzhao. He came from the Zhong family, one of the 16 martial cultivation families. The Zhong family had a staggering history that reached back 3,000 years. It was said that the first head of the Zhong family who created his family foundation with his own hands was a revolving core master. But regardless of their past, the Zhong family had greatly declined since their heydays. Still, they maintained their deep heritage and legacy. The Zhong family had 2 Xiantian realm masters that led their family. Even the 7 profound valleys had to give some respect to the Zhong family. Chapter 257 Shield of Thunder. Chapter 257 Shield of Thunder. Chapter 257 Shield of Thunder. The last person of those 20 was naturally Lin Ming. Compared to the 19 disciples in front of him, Lin Ming was extremely ordinary. He came from an ordinary family and lived an ordinary life. Yet Lin Ming aroused an enormous interest from everyone. In particular, the upper echelons of the 7 profound valleys. They had already been briefed on all of Lin Ming's information. For a 16-year-old to have such a performance in the total faction martial meeting was rare even in the last 200 years. At this time, the sun hadn't risen. Dawn was just around the corner, and yet there were already crowds of people gathered on the square of the 7 profound valleys Grand Hall. The various elders of the small sects in the 7 profound territory, the 16 group leaders of the martial cultivation families, the various martial housemasters and nobles of the 36 countries, and other great characters were gathered in the square. Any of these characters would be grand figures if placed within a small country. Their existence itself would earn the admiration of millions. But here, these people weren't even allowed to sit in the front row, much less go into the grand hall. This year's total faction martial meeting should have the most skilled disciples in nearly the last 3 centuries. In the audience, Huluo Nation's martial house master Luo was sipping some tea. As the martial house master of a large country, he had been given preferential treatment. He had a table by his side, some tea to drink, and also some dried fruits to nibble on. Definitely. Didn't Divine Phoenix Island send out a messenger? They really are giving face to our 7 profound valleys. Usually Peacock Mountain brags so much, but they've never had someone from a 4th grade sect attend their own martial meeting. Divine Phoenix Island? Martial House Master Luo stirred his tea as he slowly said, I heard a rumor from someone that Divine Phoenix Island came here for a specific reason, not to especially watch our total faction martial meeting. I don't know. Hey, what rank do you think your Huluo Nation's Wang Mu will reach? The sudden question caused Martial House Master Luo to nearly choke on his tea. Wang Mu had ultimately failed to even enter the 2nd tier, and what distressed him the most was that Huluo Nation also had to compensate with their seraphic pond. The sun finally began to rise over the horizon. The referee of the final tournament was already standing in the center of the martial stage. This person had a cultivation at the Middle Xiantian realm, and was also one of the inner court elders of the 7 profound valleys. I won't repeat the rules of the competition, they are the same as the group stage qualifiers. There are altogether 30 people in the 1st tier finals. Everyone will have at least 29 matches. Those with the least points at the end will face a challenge from those in the 2nd tier with the most points. This means that you may or may not still be in the top 30 ranks. Now, let the finals begin. The elder referee's voice was very loud and clear, the entire mountain valley resounded with his voice. Lin Ming, do your best and try hard to enter the top 10. If you're up against an opponent you cannot defeat, don't try to be brave and get yourself hurt. Qin Zia repeatedly advised Lin Ming as they headed to the contestant waiting area. Although it was against the rules to kill or disable your opponent, if the strength of the 2 contestants were similar, then they would have to fight the battle with everything they had. In such a situation it would be very difficult to control one's strength, and it wasn't uncommon to be severely injured. I understand. Lin Ming moved towards the contestant waiting area and sat patiently in a chair. The first match soon began. A core disciple and a non-seeded player walked on stage. Although this was a fierce competition between 2 individuals, the audience seemed to be a bit disappointed. They most wanted to watch a match between the direct disciples. As the battle on the stage was intensely unfolding, Lin Ming saw an extremely handsome and good-looking man walking over to him. This stylish and suave-looking man was holding a fan, and had a hint of a disdainful sneer on his face. Lin Ming furrowed his eyebrows. He didn't recognize this person. Are you Lin Ming? Yes. I am Ouyang Zifeng, a core disciple of the 7 Profound Valleys Acacia faction. I don't think I know you. It doesn't matter whether or not you know me, it's enough that I know you. Because of you, my little brother will miss his chance to participate in this important total faction martial meeting. As this handsome young man said this, Lin Ming suddenly remembered back to his time at Desert Flower Hall. He had been dining with Qin Xingxuan when a fight had broken out. In the end, he had used his samsara martial intent to injure an Acacia faction disciple whose last name was also Ouyang. So it seems he was this person's younger brother. However, at that time Lin Ming had actually gone very easy on him. The reason that Ouyang Ziyun had been injured so heavily was because he wasn't able to control his own ability, the purple flame bone lance. After his ability was broken, the true essence that he had gathered caused a backlash which resulted in him being injured. Feeling Ouyang Zifeng's reckless and sharp hostility, Lin Ming coldly said, "The reason that your little brother was injured so miserably was because he tried to use an ability he couldn't control and got struck by his own backlash. It has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with you. Humph, if it wasn't for you attacking him, How could my little brother lose control of his purple flame bone lance? Then what you are saying is that I should extend my neck out and let your little brother attack me however he wants. What if I wasn't strong enough and couldn't deal with the purple flame bone lance? Wouldn't I be burned to ashes? In Desert Flower Hall, I didn't even bother him or provoke him, and yet he had to use the purple flame bone lance which he could not control in order to kill me. If he really killed me, then the most severe punishment would be getting grounded for a month or 2. But if I killed him, then I must pay with my life. How arrogant and domineering must you 7 Profound Valley's disciples be? Ouyang Zifeng laughed viciously and said, "This world has only been decided by strength. Those who are strong make the rules. I am stronger than you, thus I make the rules. You think you are stronger than me? You'll find out soon enough. Our match is the 4th, it will soon start," Ouyang Zifeng said as he turned and strode away. He had already looked at the competition schedule ahead of time, and knew that he would encounter Lin Ming in the first round. At the time that Ouyang Zifeng left, the match on stage had already come to a conclusion. Second match, Zhong Yangzhao against Yang Yandong. As the referee's voice fell, the audience members that came from the 16 martial cultivation families let loose ringing cheers. Zhong Yangzhao was the final representative of all 16 martial families. During this total faction martial meeting, he had already reached the top 20, he had great chances of reaching the top 10. His opponent Yang Yandong had already lost 2 matches in the second group stage. Against someone who was still undefeated, even though the match hadn't yet ended, the results were already expected. Zhong Yangzhao extracted the thick saber he had strapped to his back. Yang Yandong pulled out a small array flag. As he waved it, 100 golden symbols flew into the air. Demon locking array. The golden symbols flew towards Zhong Yangzhao like a locust swarm. Zhong Yangzhao took a sudden step forwards, and his entire body exploded with sound, Dragon Tiger Slayer. His saber slashed out, its momentum like a dragon and a tiger. The surrounding true essence in the air stirred together like a raging storm of destruction, and those golden symbols that flew in the air were like snowflakes that fell into a furnace. They instantly melted away. Peng! The first saber strike destroyed Yang Yandong's array, and the second saber strike broke apart Yang Yandong's bodily true essence protection. The aftermath from that strike was already enough to angrily send Yang Yandong flying backwards. Yang Yandong's bodily true essence protection had been cleanly broken apart, but he himself wasn't injured at all. Obviously, the degree of strength control that Zhong Yangzhao possessed was extremely formidable. The difference in their strength was just too great. Zhong Yangzhao is truly fierce. I think that our 16 martial families' Zhong Yangzhao isn't any worse than the direct disciples of the 7 factions. The ones who were speaking were the disciples of the 16 martial families. As they spoke up, a 7 Profound Valley's disciple that was sitting at their side contemptuously smiled and said, "That's only because you haven't experienced the strength of the direct disciples for yourself. If Zhong Yangzhao met Ouyang Ming or even Jiang Baoyun, then he would be defeated in 5 moves. 5 moves? Heh, I really want to laugh. You 7 Profound Valley's disciples brag to the point of not knowing what you're talking about. Wait and see for yourself, then don't end up crying." The 7 Profound Valley's disciple curled his lips and didn't speak any further. At the third match, there wasn't anyone important. Fourth match, Lin Ming against Ouyang Zifeng. Ouyang Zifeng was the 3rd-ranked disciple of the Acacia faction, and he also was undefeated from the group stages. Lin Ming was naturally undefeated too. But, in the opinion of the general audience, Lin Ming may be a genius, but the difference between him and one of the 7 direct disciples was simply too great. During the qualifying stages, Lin Ming had defeated Jing Chanyu in 2 moves. However, this didn't really raise anyone's opinion of him. After all, Jing Chanyu didn't have much chances of ending up in the top 20. Thus, defeating Jing Chanyu didn't mean much. However, the upper echelon of the 7 Profound Valleys was watching this match with rapt attention, eyes glued to the stage. They were especially looking forward to seeing Lin Ming in action. This Lin Ming was just too young. In particular, the 7 Profound Valleys Valley Master Shi Zongtian had already ordered an investigation into Lin Ming's entire last 3 generations of family. After receiving the report back, Shizongtian was simply startled out of his mind. Lin Ming had actually come from an extremely ordinary background, and he was a typical common martial artist. It was simply inconceivable that he could have such amazing result. After Ouyang Zifeng walked on stage, many disciples began to immediately cheer, especially those female disciples who didn't have much talent for martial arts. They screamed until their voices were hoarse and could scream no longer. Because of their limited martial talent, they always vainly dreamed of marrying a core disciple. However, the core disciples of the Sword faction and Refiner faction pursued their martial arts path wholeheartedly, and most simply weren't lured by the pleasures of the flesh. There was just no chance of these girls being able to attract one of them. Thus the disciples of the Acacia faction were the most sought after. Compared to Ouyang Zifeng, there were far less cheers for Lin Ming. There just weren't that many disciples of the 36 countries present. Ouyang Zifeng and Lin Ming stood 100 feet apart from each other. Ouyang Zifeng sneered and said, "I heard that you can control the power of thunder. I advise you not to try and hide any cards in your hand, and to use whatever moves you have when you can. Otherwise, you won't have the opportunity to. I never intended to hide any cards. I just use what I need to when I need to. Haha, you are also arrogant beyond arrogant. Up until now, there has only been one person who has managed to force me into using my sword. I wonder if you also have the ability to force me into using my sword." As Ouyang Zifeng said this, he traced his spatial ring and took out a blue long sword. The sword was inserted into a scabbard that was made from snake skin. It looked simple, but it exuded a very light true essence fluctuation. Obviously, this scabbard was some sort of extraordinary treasure. Lin Ming faintly smiled. "Force you to draw your sword? Let's see if you can force me to draw my spear." Samsara martial intent. Lin Ming's eyes suddenly turned into two black vortexes. He was trying to come to a deeper understanding of his samsara martial intent. Even if he didn't expect his samsara martial intent to defeat his opponent, he would still use it in order to gain some more insights into his martial intent. Ouyang Zifeng had already expected that Lin Ming would use a soul attack. With a sneer, the scabbard in his hand began to fiercely tremble, and the sound of a wailing ghost cry began to emit outwards. A massive number of green ghosts suddenly emerged from the sword blade and circled around Ouyang Zifeng. These ghosts seemed to be formed of a chilling air, as if they were enough to freeze a person's soul. As Lin Ming's soul attack struck, it was completely blocked by these ghosts. Peng peng peng. As a ghost was stuck by the soul attack, it would inflate like a balloon and then burst apart. But as this ghost died, a new one would emerge to take its place. Lin Ming had killed over a dozen ghosts with his first attack, but he still hadn't been able to harm Ouyang Zifeng. "Humph. Although the power of my soul force is inferior to yours, your soul attacks are useless against me. These ghosts are condensed from the yin qi that I've refined within my body. Every time you disperse one, they will just re-enter my body. After they are nourished by my true essence, they will reform endlessly. If you can only use soul attacks, then you truly disappoint me." As Ouyang Zifeng said this, a purple flame began to cover his entire body, as if his body was drowning in an inferno. This flame sprang dozens of feet high, and soon Ouyang Zifeng was completely enveloped within it. What was strange was that this purple flame wasn't burning hot. Instead, it exuded a bone-chilling energy. The tiles underneath Ouyang Zifeng's feet began to ice over, spreading out with him at the center. Purple Flame Bone Lance. Lin Ming easily recognized this ability. Back at Desert Flower Hall, Ouyang Ziyun had also moved this move, and thus he had suffered a major loss. "My little brother used the Purple Flame Bone Lance and was defeated by you. Now, I will let you have a good look today and the true might of the Purple Flame Bone Lance." The purple flames on Ouyang Zifeng's arm condensed into a purple bone lance. From it, the sounds of wailing ghosts and tormented spirits echoed out. With Ouyang Zifeng's cultivation, he was able to display the true abilities of the purple flame bone lance. "Die! Hu!" The bone lance shot out, quick as lightning. Blurred flames followed in its path, creating the afterimage of a trailing tail of burning purple fire. A loud explosive sound pierced the air mixed with the weeping sounds of ghosts, scratching upon the eardrums of those nearby. Su dash. Lin Ming was directly pierced by the bone lance. The audience didn't even have time to respond. Ouyang Zifeng fiendishly grinned. You want to dodge this move? You are too naive. The Lin Ming that was pierced by that bone lance suddenly dissipated into shadow. It had only been an afterimage. At the same time, the bone lance suddenly changed directions, chasing Lin Ming's shadow. Divide. Ouyang Zifeng cried out, and suddenly the bone lance split into 12 shards. These 12 mini bone lances pierced towards Lin Ming from all angles. They could not be avoided. Ah! The martial artists from the 36 countries couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Qin Zia was even more nervous. Both of his hands were clenched together until they were white. In this level of confrontation, any accidental move and one could be seriously injured or even crippled. Peng 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 peng. The 12 mini purple flame bone lances simultaneously struck Lin Ming, and a massive pyre of purple fire screeched into the sky. It was just like a gloriously blooming purple rose. Ouyang Zifeng's lips curved up in a dark smile. All of the martial artists from the 36 countries were nervously waiting with breath abated. Qin Xingxuan's hands were covered with sweat. As to what the limit of Lin Ming's power was, she did not know. However, after the purple flames faded away, Ouyang Zifeng's smile faded along with them. Lin Ming was firmly standing on the martial stage, not even his clothes had been burnt. Around his body, massive purple snakes of electricity crackled as they writhed around his body, dancing, coiling, completely surrounding him. Ouyang Zifeng's face suddenly sank. To use the power of thunder as a shield. If Lin Ming could use the power of thunder to block his purple flame bone lance, then that proved that Lin Ming's thunder origin energy fusion compatibility had reached an extremely high level. It was enough to break his yin qi and threaten him. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.